It's their world. I'll just wait. Shall we wait for David? Good morning. I'd like to call the Montecito Planning Commission hearing of February 20th, 2019 to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. The third item on the administrative agenda. David, do you want to call it? Or should I just call it?
So you're on for the election?
Yes.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. So item number 3, the election of the 2019 Montecito Planning Commissioner Chair, first Vice Chair, and second Vice Chair. I'll entertain nominations. Ms. Keller, Commissioner Keller.
Charles Newman for Chair.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Yes, I second.
Okay. Second from Commissioner Sinauer. Any discussion? Speeches?
You want campaign speech?
Campaign
We
speech?
could do without those, right?
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Nomination for first Vice Chair. Commissioner Newman. Chairman Newman.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Sinauer.
Okay. Second?
I would second that.
Okay. First and second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations. Second Vice Chair. See, I can still move these meetings. Any nominations for second Vice Chair? Commissioner Sinauer.
Commissioner Kupiec.
Okay. We have a nomination for Commissioner Kupiec. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Newman, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
I have a discussion item.
Oh, Commissioner Keller.
No, I'm just wondering, is there any precedent for assuming that first vice chair should be chairs, second vice chair should be first vice chair? I'm just wondering if we are preparing ourselves for the next succession of chairs.
Well, we will ask.
If this is not the case.
Let's ask the keeper of all knowledge at the Planning Commissioner, Director Black.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. So I think that has been somewhat the convention, but you're not bound by it.
Yeah.
And to be honest, one of the things I have never tried to keep track of in either commissions is who's up for chair.
Yeah,
so the commission seemed to sort through that by themselves.
Yeah, that's my understanding, is that there's no, it's always wide open. There's no.
So it's convention, but it's not an absolute. It's certainly not.
Yeah, it's not in the bylaws.
Thank you. I just wondered, having you are the keeper of the flame of memory, and so I was just wondering what the tradition had been.
All right.
you.
So we have a nomination. We have a nomination for Commissioner Kupiec as second vice chair. We have a second. No further discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? No one opposed. Well, congratulations, commissioners. Let's take 3 minutes, and I'm not going to rush out of this chair too fast, but maybe I will.
Joe, if you don't mind, I'd like to have Don on my right.
Okay. We're going to take a quick recess.
Okay.
Back on the record, TV coverage announcement?
Chair Newman, congratulations. We need to move to item number 4, which is the appointment of the secretary and recording secretary.
All right, thank you for that reminder. Okay, item 4, appointment of the 2019 Montecito Planning Commission secretary and recording secretary.
So you can pick anybody in this room as long as they're on that side of the table.
All right, well, the chair will entertain a motion to have Mr. Wilson serve as our secretary, as he has in the past, if somebody is so inclined.
So moved. Second.
I'll
Motion.
second the motion.
All right. Motion has been made and seconded. Any discussion? All right. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Congratulations, another resume enhancing move. And now we need to nominate our recording secretary. Nominations are open for that position as well.
I nominate Mr. David Villalobos as recording secretary.
Second?
Second.
All right. Second by Commissioner Kupiak. Discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, congratulations as well. All right. Item number 5, TV coverage announcement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Montecito Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20, at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, San Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcast of Montecito Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSB TV, Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on the county's website and will be available for download there, as well as the county's YouTube channel in a day or two. Now for the roll call. Commissioner Cole? Here. Commissioner Senauer?
Here.
Commissioner Keller?
Here.
Commissioner Kupiak? Here. And Chair Newman?
Present.
Thank you.
All right. Item number 7, agenda status report.
Chair Newman and members of the commission, the status of the agenda today is there is several items listed on the agenda. Staff is ready and prepared to present on all those items. We have a coastal development permit with hearing for your decision, as well as we have a representative from Public Works coming to discuss about the Olive Hill and San Ysidro roundabouts and selection of a subcommittee member. And then we'll have a brief report, a status report on Thomas Fire and debris flow, and then long-range planning will present items on their comprehensive plan annual progress report, as well as their 2019-2020 work program for the commission today.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's proceed next to the projection report, please.
Chair Newman, members of the commission, the next scheduled date on the projection report for this commission will be on March 20th. Which has currently 2 items listed on that item. There is a 65402 government code consistency determination, as well as another project for your review and consideration on that date. And that's as far as the projection report has projected out for the next hearing.
Okay. All right, thank you. Is there any public comment on a matter that is not before us today in our agenda? Any slips, Commissioner Cole? All right. See no public comment, then we'll proceed to item 10, Planning Commissioners' informal reports. Do any commissioners have anything to report today?
Nothing from me.
Neither from me.
I have nothing to report since December. Thank you.
Okay, no reports. And I joined that club. All right, proceeding now to item 11, the minutes of the December 19 meeting are before us. Does anybody have any comments or edits to the meeting minutes for that meeting?
I do have a question.
Just, Commissioner.
On condition number 60, it was our commission's concern that the roundabout, or the turnaround, be maintained. And I wasn't certain that we requested that it be located within the road easement. I thought there was discussion as to whose responsibility it would be, and possibly Mr. Tuttle could clarify as to how this part came about.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller. Sorry, it's been a couple months, so
Yes.
trying to remember. But my recollection was the discussion was, as you indicated, interest in making sure that the turnaround within the road would be maintained. And it was discussed that that road is currently maintained and owned by the HOA, and so we drafted this condition language to verify or provide language that would require verification that that turnaround is within the existing roadway easement and maintained by the HOA, or some documentation as such.
Okay, part of my
Excuse me.
concern-
If you'd wait to be recognized, please. Commissioner Keller.
All right. He is, I would understood that there was uncertainty as to whose jurisdiction it was in, and so was my question. So has there been any feedback from the applicant about that being a problem?
Not since the hearing, no. There hasn't been any concern expressed from the applicant in terms of being able to verify that.
If I may, my recollection is, as you've suggested, that the road is indeed owned by the HOA, and the extent to which there needed to be the addition of a roundabout and it needed to be maintained, that would be the legal responsibility of the HOA and not of the applicant. The applicant could not legally commit to its maintenance beyond and for any period of time. So wanting the assurance that this roundabout for safety purposes would not only be installed but maintained, I requested that this condition of documentation be added.
May I speak?
Please.
I understood that the turnaround was actually going to be on the property of the applicant. So this would mean that the applicant is ceding a portion of their property to the HOA? Was that your recollection, Mr. Newman?
No, my recollection is that the roundabout was always planned and going to be on HOA property.
And at my site visit, that was my understanding also, as I walked the road and had a descriptive by the agent that in fact was within the HOA's purview and responsibility.
Fine. Because it was required for this particular property.
Correct.
I thought there was some question about this particular property having more responsibility, but if that is not correct, thanks. I appreciate the clarification.
Any other questions or comments on the minutes for the hearing of December 19? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
I recommend that the minutes be approved as they are.
Second?
A second.
All right. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye, please.
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved as submitted. Thank you. All right. Director's report and Board of Supervisors hearing summary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, since your commission last met, the Board of Supervisors has met 5 times. They met initially, or for their first meeting of the year on January 8th, and there were no substantive items on that day. It was really installation of the new board member and other public officials. January 15th was another board hearing date, and there were no planning items on that date of interest to your commission. On the 29th, the board met and approved a contract with a consulting firm to prepare ordinance amendments for the advanced meter project for the Southern California Gas Company. This might sound somewhat familiar to some of you because we did this once before and then the project was put on hold. The intention is that ordinance amendments be prepared to exempt the Southern California Gas advanced meter projects from the zoning ordinance requirements. So you will be seeing that in the future. The more substantive issue of the day was a briefing on cannabis and some consideration of amendments to both the land use ordinances and the business license ordinance. It was a very well-attended and lively hearing if you didn't have an opportunity to see it. And the result really has no effect, I don't think, in Montecito per se, but the board did direct that we process several, 2 ordinance amendments to the Land Use and Development Code, and one was to prohibit any cultivation of cannabis in the Agriculture 1 zone districts in the inland area of the county. And the effect would be, or in certain zones, or certain zone districts, so I'll be a little bit more precise, to the extent that the board's direction was precise, which it wasn't exactly precise. But the interest is that cultivation, both indoor and outdoor cultivation in the Ag 1 zone districts, in Ag 1-5, Ag 1-10, and perhaps Ag 1-20 be prohibited. The Ag 1-20 is a little bit less clear. It may be that the board would want to prohibit it on 20-acre parcel sizes, so we'll be looking at some maps and trying to outline what those 2 alternatives would look like. But they did direct us to process those amendments. And as I said, those just apply in the inland zoning ordinance, so you won't be seeing those. The second amendment that they requested that we process is to expand the noticing for conditional use permits that are required when a cannabis operation is either adjacent to or takes access through or is located within an EDRN. And the board wanted to make sure that everybody within that EDRN was notified of the cannabis operation. So we'll be going to the County Planning Commission to get some input from them about these potential ordinances and then drafting ordinances for the normal hearing process. I'm sure it will be an interesting process. On moving on to February 5th, there were no discussion items that day, but there were 2 administrative items that I thought your commission would want to know occurred. The first was the 101 HOV Local Coastal Program Amendment was accepted. The suggested modification was accepted by the Board of Supervisors, and it has since, I believe, or it's probably going in March, to the Executive Director to finish that certification process. It's going at their March hearing. And then the second item was the board received a report on the emergency permit that the department issued for the debris nets in Montecito. So they did receive that as well. And then on February 12th, we conducted an oil and gas briefing for the Board of Supervisors. And I know oil and gas isn't an issue that directly affects Montecito, but I think it's an important issue for the whole county. So that might be something of interest to your commissioners. Finally, on February 12th, the P&D director selection was announced, and Lisa Plowman was selected to be our next planning and development director, and she will start on March 18th. So she should be at your next meeting, and we'll obviously introduce her and bring her here. So I think that's it, unless you have questions.
Any questions on the director's report? All right.
My only question, you set this
Commissioner
off.
Keller.
you said this off the record.
Yes.
But you're leaving at the end of March?
I am. My last day with the county after almost 35 years will be March 29th.
So you will have an opportunity to overlap with the new director?
Yes. Yes.
And have you worked with her before?
Yes, I have. So Ms. Plowman worked in the department for 11 years, 12 years, back in the 90s and through, I think, 2006. She left in 2006 and then has been working in the private sector since then. But yes, I did. And when she was with the department last, she was the deputy director of long-range planning. So, yeah, I'm very pleased.
Commissioner Senauer.
So you will be with us at our next?
I will.
Great. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? I just have one, which is there anything else that you can think of that's on the horizon in the next 6 months or so that would be within our jurisdiction? As an example, you mentioned the debris flow nets, and understand that they have a temporary emergency permit. Will that be before us?
So, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I know that they were required to and have submitted a follow-on application, right? So I don't know if you'll see it within 6 months, but you'll definitely be seeing the permanent application for the debris nets.
Okay. Anything else on the horizon as you start to look at the sunset, so to speak?
Can you think of? Yeah, I think, Mr. Chair, I think the bigger issues are going to be the roundabouts, which you'll be talking about a little bit later today. I don't think the section of 101 going through Montecito will come anytime in the near future, but you'll start to see pieces of that project in the near future.
Commissioner Senauer.
On that note, has an application been submitted for the roundabouts? Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Second, in projecting, the STRs, and there was going to be a workshop that was,
Yes.
if you could kind of go into that and where the status is on that. Thank you.
Sure, and you will hear a little bit more about this as part of, I think, the long-range planning work program today. But, you know, the board asked us to process those amendments that I spoke about with cannabis, and we only have so many staff. And so we determined that we should wait on the short-term rentals because we hadn't really gotten any momentum publicly to tackle that issue again. So we're putting that on hold for several months while we process the cannabis ordinances, and then those will come back.
Okay, seeing no more questions, thank you for that. We'll now move to project status update.
Chair and members of the commission, just a quick update on a couple of projects that has been before you over the last year. The 1206 Channel Drive, there, if you recall, they did add a condition. Sorry, they added a commissioner. Sorry, you added a condition on there regarding the the historical report, and so they have submitted the bond that was added as that condition. That was condition number 5, and then the first portion of the architectural historian that was required by condition 6 has been submitted. So the applicants are complying with those conditions that we had discussed at that hearing, and the project is moving forward with that oversight. And then the other project that went before you was the Wilfong appeal. That has subsequently been appealed to the Board of Supervisors, mainly in regards to some discussions between the two parties about the lot line adjustment. And my understanding is that they're continuing to discuss that with each other. So there's no date been set to the board as that might be resolved on its own. So that's as far as I have today as far as project status updates.
All right, thank you. All right, then we'll proceed then on to the standard agenda, item 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. Following securing on the request of Paul Rubison of Appleton Architects, agent for the owner, to consider case number 18 CDH 26, application filed on September 20th, 2018, and to determine the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to sections 15301 and 15303 of the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
All right, we'll first start with any ex parte and site visit disclosures.
None here.
I visited the site yesterday and spent about 30 minutes, 20 minutes reviewing. Thank you.
Commissioner Keller?
I had extensively visited the site before, but I did drive by again and just to ascertain how this would impact the current residents.
Any disclosures, Commissioner? Okay. And for myself, I visited the property the week before our last scheduled meeting in January. Spent about half an hour to 40 minutes walking the site. All right, then. We'll proceed next to the staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. My name is Alex Tuttle. I will be presenting this project on behalf of Kara Ristig, the planner, who was unfortunately with the scheduling change for this project unable to attend today's hearing. So let's dive in. So this project, many of you might be familiar with this property. It went through extensive permit process and appeals with a prior design back in 2014 through 2016, or maybe even 2017. The project subsequently, or the property subsequently changed ownership, and they have come in with a new project, which is essentially a facelift of the existing residence. So the residence, the property is located at 1154 Channel Drive. It's 0.44 acres in size and zoned 1E1. And I'll just walk through in the next series of slides a comparison between what's out there today and what is being proposed. With respect to the site plan, the existing residence would remain. The existing pool would be demolished and a new pool would be constructed. The only new square footage would be a new front porch on the lower level of the residence and a enclosure in the rear of the garage for utilities and a generator. No new square footage is being added to the residence. As I mentioned, only sort of exterior modifications to building materials, doors and windows, that kind of thing. So here's a comparison of existing and proposed elevations. Here we have the southern elevation facing Channel Drive, and as you can see, a couple of key points are the elimination of the clear story on the single story portion of the residence, modifications to the chimneys on the second story portion, and elimination of a small balcony on the second story, and then the addition of a new covered porch on the lower ground level. Here is the northern elevation from the rear of the property, and it's pretty self-explanatory as far as what the changes are. From the western elevation, and here you can more readily discern the proposed new balcony on the front of the residence and the changes to the second story. And then lastly, the eastern elevation from the different vantage point. So the overall mass, bulk, and scale remain the same. Height remains the same. They are going to be refurbishing the existing landscaping on the property, and the applicant is here, and they'll be able to provide a little more information with regard to that. You did receive a memo from staff either late Friday, I believe, that I highlighted two changes that have come in, primarily in response to conversations with the neighbors to the northeast, and that is elimination of 2 strawberry trees that had concerns regarding potential intrusion into private views, as well as here's the utility enclosure, and the proposal is just to add a roof to that to further mitigate any noise generation from the generator. Here's the front landscape plan. As I mentioned, a new pool and a hardscape area and a new native lawn mix with various native and drought-tolerant shrubs and ground cover. So with respect to CEQA, given the scope of the project, it was determined to be exempt from CEQA pursuant to 15301 and 15303, which cover modifications and minor alterations to existing facilities and new construction or conversion of small structures. And formal notice of exemption is included as attachment C to the staff report. Policy consistency, the project, again, given its minor scope, was determined to be consistent with community plan as well as coastal land use plan. Existing services from Montecito Water Sanitary District and Montecito Fire District would remain. No impacts to any resources of concern in terms of biological, noise, air quality, visual. And as the concerns that were previously raised with the prior project in terms of increases in mass on the second story, those have been eliminated with this current design, given that they're not adding any new square footage. So the finding of neighborhood compatibility can be made as well. The project is compliant with Article 2 Coastal Zoning Ordinance with respect to allowable uses, front, side, and rear setbacks, parking requirements, allowable height, which they aren't increasing from the current residence, and the distance between buildings. And with that, staff recommends that your commission make the required findings for approval as specified in attachment A of the staff report, determine the project is exempt from CEQA as specified in attachment C, and approve the project, case number 18 CDH 26, subject to the conditions included as attachment B.
All right, thank you for that. We'll now proceed to questions by the commissioners concerning the staff report and recommendation. Commissioner Senauer.
To the conditions, should I address that here or, okay. The project specific condition 11, which is the abandonment of the water well. Could you go into that a little bit, please? Thank you.
Sure. You may recall this issue came up with the last project, and it was discovered during the course of processing the prior project that there was an existing well on the property that dates back to 70s or 80s. Mm-hmm. That was permitted by the Coastal Commission. And it was permitted before the property was served by Montecito Water District. And the Coastal Commission on their permit included a condition requiring that the well be stopped being used in the event that the parcel ever got water service from the district. As time went by and they got hooked up, that requirement was overlooked, and so we're using this as an opportunity with this new project to resolve that outstanding violation.
Thank you. So the agency EHS will basically be the agency that oversees this abandonment?
We would require confirmation that it's been properly abandoned and that they've obtained a proper abandonment permit from Environmental Health. Okay. And that would be verified before, I'm just looking at the timing.
Required
prior to final building inspection clearance.
Okay, and not before.
Correct.
I have a question about on-site construction parking. I know it's pro forma, basically how it's the descriptive of it, but there have been community members who have been in that area with building nearby on Butterfly, where all the construction equipment and trucks line both sides of Butterfly to Hill Road consistently. It's a big build, big demo and rebuild, and sometimes there's 15 which take up all the available public parking. And with this site, I was wondering, since it's somewhat constrained both by the width of the driveway, being 11 feet, I believe, and the back area where the motor court is now and will continue to be. Is street parking basically a default then? I mean, how do how do you constrain that to the site?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Senauer, the condition does read that all construction vehicle and parking and storage occur on site. So street parking would not be a default. That would not be consistent with that condition. Given the scope of the project, which is a little scaled back since they're not doing a complete demo rebuild, it's possible or anticipated probably that there wouldn't be the need for as many construction vehicles, and they could be accommodated on site. Okay. I would imagine with work on the pool, they might be parking on the lawn since they're going to be rehabbing the landscaping anyway. But the applicant could perhaps speak to that as well.
Thank you.
Commissioner Keller.
I was present for all the previous discussion, and I can't tell you how delighted I am to see this new project, because it's a vast improvement on what was proposed before. I am just curious, because the 760-foot addition of the porch in front, I'm sorry, I'm trying to make contact with Mr. Tuttle. There we go. It looks, because interior, the space in the front of the house is described as kitchen dining area, and there is no designated living area, so I imagine that front porch will be used a lot for entertainment, etc. And would there be any different requirements if it were enclosed, or enclosed at a later time, or glassed in, etc.? Is this something that is that would be would the requirements change if that were done at a later date?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller, if they were to enclose it, that would be subject to a new permit. So it's not uncommon for homeowners to come in with requests to permit enclosure of an existing covered porch or covered patio. We see that from time to time, but it is something that would require a new permit.
And is the scrutiny any greater if you do it initially, or is it easier to accomplish if you're doing it in that kind of step process?
I wouldn't say the scrutiny would be any greater or lesser one way or the other. As built now, it would be unconditioned space, so if they came in to look to enclose it, there would be further requirements on the building side of things in order to meet building code to make it conditioned space. But from a planning perspective, we would just be looking at the new increase in square footage, and from a BAR would look at it from an FAR perspective, that kind of thing.
No, I was just looking at the plans. It just seemed like something they might want to do, and I wondered if there were going to be any problems with trying to do that at a later time. Thank you.
I wouldn't foresee any major problems with it. It would just be a further process.
Mr. Senauer,
I have a question regarding conditions. This is the compromise condition. Is this the appropriate time to bring this up?
Maybe we could wait to ask that of the applicant.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions of staff? All right, thank you for that presentation. We're going to go to presentation by the applicant.
The applicant can come and make the presentation.
Mr. Chairman Newman and fellow commissioners, my name is Kenneth Minot. I'm with Appleton Partners, and I'm representing Stephen Burchard in the renovation of this project. Just a few minutes. We're just going to show you before and after, just to kind of acquaint you with some of the
All right,
renovations.
why don't we budget 5 minutes and we'll
Sure.
see if you need more. Thank you.
Okay. So as you can see, the house, many of you have been there before. It's existing. There's the little clear story and the the little balcony that's up off of the second floor. We would kind of characterize this as maybe a 1970s kind of Monterey colonial. It has the balcony and features of that, but it's clay Spanish tile roof. So what we've done and what our client would like to do is to change the style and give it, as Alex described, a minor facelift. And the major component that we've added is the front loggia, or the front porch. As many of you know, this is Southern California living. I don't think our client has any intention of actually enclosing that. There is kind of a family area off of that. And so it's kind of outdoor living off to the front with the ocean view. We have enclosed the 2 side walls so that it gives it a little more enclosure and some warmth to it. But the side facing the ocean would remain open. At least that's the intention with our current owner. We did take away the Monterey Colonial balcony when we added the loggia. We had plans earlier to keep that, but we thought this a higher ceiling within the loggia was nicer. And of course, many balconies up on the second floor, people don't use them quite often in master bedrooms. So we decided to remove that element. And then in terms of the roof line, we've kept all of that pretty much as it was before. The clear story has gone away, but it's actually been kind of encapsulated by the roof. The pitch of the roof is kind of California framed over the top to extend out and go over the balcony. When we moved, there were 3 fireplace chimneys before, now there's 2. So one of them moved and the other remained where it is. The major change on the perimeter is the entry. We've converted that from this angled entry, again, kind of a 1970s style, I think you would kind of characterize that as, and straightened that out and made a little entry court off to the leeward side of the house, kind of the back of the house, so that when you enter, you pass through and you look out towards the ocean. The garage is the same, and the house is the same. It's just been upgraded in terms of its aesthetics. Thank you very much for your time.
Any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Sanauer?
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful updating
Thank you.
Of the property and the house. The question I have was, there is no balcony on the rear. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Second of all, the landscaping.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can go into that, the compromise condition, if you
Well,
could.
we have a representative here who can.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Keller.
In addition to removing the balcony on the back of the house, it looks like you've also removed the windows and
Correct.
just have one window. And I know that was a big concern in the previous iteration because the view is really only into the neighbor's yard.
Okay.
So I think that I just wanted to commend you as
Oh.
well. I feel as though this design is a win-win for everybody, the neighborhood, the new owner, and the neighbors. And so just congratulations to your company.
Thank you. Our client agrees. He feels that this is great improvement to what's there, and he's looking forward to actually getting the construction started and moving forward. Thank you.
All right, anything further on behalf of the applicant? Now it's Mr. Kimball's turn.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I'm
morning.
Kim Kimball. I represent the applicant, Stephen Burchad, and his entity. And we were in discussion with Mrs. Petrovich, who's here, regarding some neighbor concerns over view and noise. And we resolved them by submitting to you a compromise condition that would remove the 2 trees that could grow up into the view plane and cover the generator, put the generator in an enclosure with a roof to reduce the noise. So these 2 conditions, as you see on this handout, are acceptable to my client.
And just for the record, we have distributed a document captioned compromise condition language proposed by applicant and neighbor, having 2 conditions in document number 187-80936. And these are the 2 conditions that are acceptable to your client as the applicant.
That's correct.
All right. Any questions? Counsel for the applicant?
May I just ask of you, will these be added to the existing conditions, or what are the conditions that these would modify? I'm just looking to see.
So Chair Newman, members of the commission, I recommend that we take up that discussion after we have public comment and during deliberations or our staff questions, that we can answer that question.
Okay,
and any comments we have regarding those conditions.
All right, thank you. And I have a slip from Susan Petrovich. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brand new, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I'm Susan Petrovich with Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, representing the neighbors immediately to the north, the Sturgises. I presume you have both my letters, and you, of course, have the compromise, which we asked be added as 2 new conditions. I agree with all the comments. This is an enormous improvement over what one of the commissioners previously called the lollipop characteristic of the house. It really, they've done, it's like a miracle. It really is beautiful. And it's certainly a great improvement over the formerly proposed project. So the Sturgises and the Hares are very much in favor. The Sturgises were particularly concerned about the view blockage by landscaping, because not only the strawberry trees, but the hedge theoretically could get very large and block their existing view. So we appreciate the applicant's agreement to compromise and preserve existing views. And the generator was previously closer to the property line, which would have been right under their, pretty much right under their deck. So now it's in a much better location, and with the little cabinet will keep the noise levels down. So we appreciate that too, and ask that you add those conditions. And my clients are very much supportive of the project. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Any question? All right, next we have a public comment from Laura Bridley. Bridley, excuse me.
Good morning, members of the commission, and congratulations on your new nominations. I'm here representing the Montecito Association. I'm the chair for the Land Use Committee this year, so we know that we tracked this several years ago, and it was a difficult project for all parties, and we just wanted to lend our support to what's before you today. I talked to Ms. Ristig a couple weeks ago, and she said that a lot of the stuff had been worked out. So we have not scheduled it for a recent Land Use Committee discussion, but based on internal discussions, we think it's a great project and suggest your approval.
All right, thank you. All right, is there any other public comment regarding this project? No slips have been received, and seeing no hands in the audience, we'll then close public comment, and we'll close the public hearing. We'll now proceed to Commissioners' questions and deliberations. Commissioner Senauer.
Thank you. I have a question about the landscaping condition, the compromise, which seems extremely appropriate and doable. Does this run with the land? In other words, if this is sold, does this condition in perpetuity apply?
Sorry. Commissioner Senauer, through the chair. The answer to your question is yes. It would be a permit condition that would run with the permit and run with the land.
Thank you. The other, I would like to, it is referred to as the property to the north. I'd like an address, please, if you could put in 1157 Hill Road. I think that for public record is of import to include the address and the APN number rather than just the neighbor to the north. Thank you.
Commissioner Keller. Commissioner Keller.
I just wanted to acknowledge that I understand my question about would this be a new condition or a revision has been answered, but you can reiterate it if you would, please.
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, these requested conditions can either be added as separate conditions to the project, or like the compromise condition 1 could be incorporated as a project description. Whenever the chair's ready or wants further questions, staff does have comments on the proposed addition to the condition number 1.
All right, and for myself, with respect to item 17 on page A4, other department conditions, number 2, I believe that a letter was received and dated December 20th, 2018 from Montecito Fire Protection. And if my recollection, indeed the record is correct, I believe we should add that to item 17.2. Yeah. All right. All right, any other questions, deliberations by commissioners?
So Chair Newman, members of the commission, staff does want to provide comments in regards to the proposed or the compromised condition number 1. There has been some discussion on the commission or members of the commission in regards to this condition. Staff does want to provide some comments on that, knowing that the commission does have discretion in reviewing conditions of approval, either adding, modifying, or deleting those conditions. One of the points that we'd like to have the commission consider when reviewing this compromise condition language is that the applicability about it or the practicability about enforcing it. The concerns that we have on this condition is that it appears to be subjective in the eyes of permit compliance as far as what would be a view shed issue. Is it the neighbor's issue or is it the property owner's issue? So it puts the department in a difficult position as far as enforcing this condition. So we have concerns with the enforceability about it. Other options the commission may consider is on other projects is providing a condition requiring that landscaping shall be of a vegetation that won't exceed a certain height or other items. However, we do have concerns with the way that this condition is worded as far as the enforceability of it by staff. If there is a complaint, it goes to he said or she said as far as, you know, whose view is being blocked or not. So what we're seeing is really a private agreement between two parties, and it's being placed as or proposed as a condition of approval on a project. So we just want to bring that to the commission for review.
So is it therefore, as I'm sensing, staff recommendation that we not approve the first condition?
Staff's recommendation is not to include that compromise language as a condition of approval.
All right, Commissioner Keller.
So you would suggest incorporating some height language in it, so there's specifics, so there is a standard for enforceability?
So the commission does have discretion in reviewing the projects, and if the condition finds a nexus to the project and other site-specific issues, the commission may consider adding a condition that would require the landscaping to be of a vegetation of a certain style or type to be reviewed during the preliminary or final bar review, and provide direction to staff to include that as a condition of approval, so that during bar review those landscaping components would be considered. That way it's more enforceable that way, because then we're enforcing on certain set standards or specific criteria that we can evaluate on. So that's what staff is looking for, is some specificity, so that way when we're doing compliance that we know what we're complying and it's not subjective, that there's set standards that we're evaluating the project against.
So to summarize, if I'm hearing it correctly, you're asking if there were to be a condition that it be objectively stated so that it is not subject to interpretation. Is that correct?
Chair Newman, members of the commission, that is correct.
May I ask follow-up? But that's why I asked about a height restriction. That seems to me completely objective. But you would prefer to have a specification of the type of vegetation that can be planted rather than giving a height limitation?
Chair Newman, members of the commission, so the recommendation isn't to get into the details of the landscaping plan. An option that the commission could consider is providing direction for staff to add a condition that during the Board of Architectural review, that when the landscape plans are evaluated, that vegetation is included or incorporated, that would be of the height or a standard that would be evaluated during the Board of Architectural review process.
Commissioner Kupiak?
So your recommendation is that MBAR make that call in terms of defining the height limitation in that language?
Chair Newman, members of the commission, that is an option that the commission may consider. And I think Supervising Planner Alex Tuttle has some experience on other projects that he could weigh in on as well.
Okay. Commissioner Cole?
Thank you, Chairman. I think over the last 3 years, I've been spent hours on this property and then the property next door to it, represented by Ms. Petrovich. We've also spent hours over the years figuring out things that prior commissioners have done and commissions have done. The language shall not impair ocean and island view. I know that I've seen Ms. Petrovich in action with photographs and line items and so forth. I'm not so worried about the I agree it needs to be enforceable. I'm not worried about the type of vegetation, but there should be some kind of a height limitation. And I don't know if this is a permit condition or whether it would be a view easement entered into between the two owners. But I agree that I think it's a good thing to have. I think it needs to be more specific so that it can be enforced more easily in the future. But I would just say a height limitation.
All right. Let me suggest this, if I may. Council and the parties before us today, both the applicant and the neighbor, have seemingly worked collegially to reach a resolution. Would it be helpful to do so along the lines of the staff recommendation if we took a 5-minute recess or trailed this for the beginning of another agenda item? We would like to hopefully get closure on this today for you, but we would like to do so in a way that hopefully achieves a balance between what you've presented to us and the staff recommendation. So let me first ask counsel for the applicant, would that be useful and something you'd be amenable to? And we'll also ask counsel for the neighbor the same question, if I may.
So, Chair and members of the commission, I think we could resolve this within a 5-minute break and bring it back. I don't think we could necessarily need to trail it. That's an option, but I think we could resolve it in a 5-minute break and come back.
Let's see what counsel for the parties have to say. Okay. Please, Mr. Campbell.
Let's do that.
May I ask?
Are you going to call a recess?
The question is, are you able today to resolve this perhaps with a 5-minute or so break?
I believe I am. We could use the roof line of the house.
All right.
Mr. Chair, Susan Petrovich again for the neighbors. You know, it took us weeks to work out all the heights on the vegetation on the previous project with literally story pole, because there's an existing view, and if you grew a hedge, for instance, and it's a great hedge, a privet hedge, but it has an opportunity, it grows high if you don't trim it. Everybody trims their hedges, but sometimes people don't. They were very kind to get rid of the strawberry trees because they had a potential for getting large. But Mr. Burchard and his neighbors have discussed the fact that he is going to keep his property pruned and the trees pruned and the hedge pruned, and won't let it grow into the view shed. But we had different heights for different places on the property. That's why I said it took weeks. And that's the difficulty of doing a height limit. We can do it, but we can't do it in 5 minutes unless we have that old landscape plan. Alex, do you have that landscape plan? I didn't bring that with me. The one from the prior project that had very specific points on the property that the vegetation could not exceed. But I don't have that with me, and if the staff doesn't have it, I can't agree to anything without knowing what we did back then. And that's been, 2-3 years ago. So
All right.
I don't remember
well,
the
thank
specifics.
You for that. It takes certainly two people to tango.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I would suggest, first of all, we've removed the plants that are likely to grow into that view. I'd like to suggest we just say that none of the vegetation from this project can exceed the ridge line of the house. And why wouldn't that work?
All right, let me suggest this. Let's take a 5-minute recess. We'll let counsel for the applicant and the Sturgises confer and see if there's a possible resolution to this one issue, but we'll take it up in 5 minutes after a short recess. So let's be in recess now. All right, we'll reconvene the meeting of the Montecito Planning Commission. I'll invite counsel for the applicant to take the podium and perhaps give us a report on the discussions during our recess.
Mr. Chair and members of the commission, I'm afraid we're unable to come to an agreement. I had suggested we use the lower ridge line as a standard above which no vegetation from this project could rise. But Ms. Petrovich is worried about the view down the side, and we've even agreed to say that there would be no obstruction down the side where there is a view, but she's not comfortable with that. So we either have to, you have to approve it in as you see fit, and she'll have to decide whether or not to appeal it, or we have to continue it, which we'd rather not do. So I'd ask that you come to some resolution on your own behalf.
All right, thank you for that report. All right, so we'll resume our deliberations. Any commissioners have any further comments or questions? Commissioner Senower?
Yes, just a comment. I think the alternate compromise of ridgeline and the side plantings is a reasonable metric as a standard, and that would be my thoughts on it.
Commissioner Keller?
In Ms. Petrovich's letter of January 15th, she proposes a 20-foot limit, which I'm not sure if that's higher or lower than the ridge line of the first story. It seems to me it would be higher, so that the lower standard of the ridge line, I think, would be completely appropriate and reasonable for us to impose.
Commissioner Cole?
First of all, I was here during the previous iteration with the Olson Trust. This is a massive improvement, massive. So I'm in favor of moving forward today. I'm not in favor of designing this thing on the fly. The height, the staff said that it's difficult for them to enforce. The height limitations are usually if they're not carefully drawn, are the full employment act for lawyers. I do know a lot of lawyers who do nothing but litigate site and height. If something grows too high, or if it doesn't grow in the right way, you lose $1 million view, or maybe more than $1 million. So I would be in favor of making a motion to approve the project, take the generator compromise, and leave it to the parties to either work out or to appeal to the Board of Supervisors.
Is that a motion, Commissioner Cole?
No, I'm just deliberating.
All right. So the chair will entertain a motion with respect to this agenda item. Commissioner Keller?
If you are considering Commissioner Cole as the alternative and appeal, I think in order to have closure, which I believe the owners and neighbors are all entitled to have, and the ability to move forward, I would like to make a motion that the proposed compromise condition 1 indicate a height limit of no higher than the ridge line of the first story of the house, and that the second condition be incorporated as stated.
Is that a motion?
I would
That
second.
is a motion.
And
yes.
I would second that motion.
Yeah, I was going to second it.
All right. Motion's been made by Commissioner Keller. I think Commissioner Kupiak seconded that. And to restate the motion is that the staff report be approved with the addition of item 1 on the compromise condition to be restated to indicate that any tree or other vegetation planted or maintained on the project site as part of the subject project shall be maintained in a manner that it will not exceed the existing roof height,
A first story roof.
first story roof height.
Yeah. If I may ask a question of staff
All right.
when you get to discussion.
And the additional supplemental condition will be as stated in compromise condition 2. So I understand that to be the motion that has been made and seconded. Discussion on the pending motion. Commissioner Cole.
Just a question for staff. Staff, you raised this as being the original compromise language as being not specific enough to enforce, being too subjective. Does the motion get you to where you need to be as far as specificity, as far as enforcement?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Cole, I think having a set height that we can objectively measure against gives us a greater level of comfort. I did want to mention too whether it was brought up earlier as to adding addresses in that condition, whether that was something the rest of the board wanted to pull into the motion.
All right. Commissioner Senauer.
Yes, I'd like to add in this motion also to include an address of the Hill Road property. As I mentioned before, 1157. Could someone confirm that that in fact is the address, 1157 Hill Road?
I believe it is, but we can verify that before.
Okay.
Before
and
modifying.
Continuing discussion regarding the referencing of the side yards and landscaping height. I was wondering if there's any way we could include where we have the roof line. I'm just looking where we have the roof line, the lowest, the ridge line as the metric for height. If there anything we could do on the side that would, again, sort of add to the motion a metric and standard that is could be manifest or not. Just leave it to the front and back. Are we doing the rear? Is it the rear and the front? Are we going to include the side? I mean, how specific do we need to be for location?
It says on the project site.
Yeah, I believe the pending motion says any tree or other vegetation on the project site, so that would include
The side.
all dimensions.
Okay, thank you.
So that would be subject to the height limit that we've specified.
That is how we would interpret it and enforce it, is at any point in the property that it would be limited to that height.
Commissioner Keller.
I was just prepared to amend my motion to include, instead of the property lying immediately northeast of the project site, to include the address.
So, Chair Newman, members of the commission, just for the benefit of staff, if we could just get the whole motion restated. So one of the questions that we're having is if it's needed to have the address in there or not, being that we have a metric now. So it might not be necessary to actually have the addresses for the surrounding properties, because now it's site specific as far as the height. So the condition could be worded that all vegetation or trees on the property shall not exceed the roof line of the first story.
Yeah. The chair concurs with that observation, and if we do indeed have an objective criteria for all vegetation on the property, it matters not from which direction one observes the property at all. So if I may, can I suggest that as a friendly amendment to the motion that's before us, we eliminate the address reference, state specifically the ridgeline criteria, and it will be maker of the motion and the second of the motion accept that as a friendly amendment.
Having made the motion, I was just going to say, yeah, we're referencing in this both the property to the north and the northeast, and I think we should eliminate both of those references, because limiting the height will also benefit the public, because it will not block views of the mountains over the house. So I think that just having a clear and enforceable height limitation is the best way to go.
All right, thank you. And the second of the motion.
I didn't.
Yeah, I seconded it. No,
Okay.
I'm
Yes.
All right.
amending those changes.
All right.
Mr. Chair, before you
I'm sorry, we're in commission, we're deliberating and discussing now.
I know, but you're changing conditions, and there was no testimony. You know, we weren't allowed to testify regarding this condition because you're just making it up as you go along. And
Well,
in the
thank
interest
you.
of not having to appeal this, I really don't want to have to appeal this, but in the interest of having to appeal this, if I could just point out one thing about the motion that is going to force us to appeal.
Yeah, Ms. Petrovich, thank you. We offered you an opportunity for comment at the appropriate time. The commission is now in its deliberations and discussions, and we're going to proceed as the commission so desires. So, thank you.
But there's been no opportunity to have public comment on the condition that you're changing. So that's not full public participation. It'll take less time to argue for me to suggest it than for you to allow me to just tell you what the issue is that will cause him an appeal.
Chair Newman, it's within the Commission's discretion to reopen public comment.
Does anybody want to reopen public comment?
Yeah, I would reopen public comment. I think the more information we have, the better.
All right. The motion's been made to reopen public comment. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second it.
The motion's made, second to reopen public comment. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Ms. Petrovich, very briefly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As it stands now, there is no vegetation over 6 feet on the side yards. And with this motion, you would significantly increase the potential height. There is a proposed hedge, so that could create a new view blockage, which was what we were trying to avoid. And Mr. Kimball did try to address the side yards, and he didn't go into any detail. But I think that a 6 foot hedge would conform with fence height limits in Montecito in the coastal zone. And so if you could just include that the vegetation along the side yards would not exceed, along the east and west sides of the house would not exceed 6 feet, then we would probably not have to appeal, because I don't think that would impair the existing view from the Sturgis home. Just a suggestion.
Okay. Any more public comment?
May I ask a question of the side yards? There currently is vegetation along the east side.
Along the east side, there is almost nothing that is on this property. It's proposed to have a hedge, a privet hedge, which can get very tall.
Right. I know. I'm just saying that on the current overview, it looks as though there is a hedge currently.
That's actually on the neighbor's property.
Oh, I
it's
see.
it's and that's Mr. Hare who can control it. He owns that whole area where the easement is, the easement down to the beach. So I know it's hard, but there's not a very wide side yard. But for the Sturgises, that the sides of the house from their long balcony that goes along the whole front of their house is a big part of their view of the ocean and the islands. So that's my suggestion.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kimball, you'd like to be recognized?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think this is much ado about nothing. The driveway is the wider side yard, and there's nothing that's going to grow in the driveway. So that's a non-issue, and the driveway is going to remain, and it goes the entire length of the property. On the other side, it's I understand about an 8-foot setback, and we would agree that nothing over 8 feet high could grow in that setback, if that'll help resolve this. Thank you.
All right. So we have a pending motion that has been seconded. More discussion. Commissioner Keller.
I'm willing to amend my initial motion to indicate that vegetation on the site shall not exceed the height of the roof line, and in the side yards shall not exceed 8 feet.
And the seconder is amenable to those changes.
All right. Any more discussion? Commissioner Senor.
I believe the metrics on both, including east and west side yards, is appropriate to the motion.
All right. Any other discussion? And I understand then that based on what's been represented to us, that there will not be an appeal should the commission choose to adopt the motion as made, and that the neighbors will not appeal. All right, since we're ready for a vote, all in favor of the motion as amended, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. All right, the motion carries unanimously.
Can we just have it read clearly? Has someone taken enough notes on this so we're on the same page?
I'll take a stab at it. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, any tree or other vegetation planted, placed, or maintained on the project site as part of the subject project shall be maintained in a manner that it will not exceed the ridge line of the first story of the residence, period. Vegetation in the side yards shall not exceed a height of 8 feet, period.
I think we need to add east and west side yards, as Commissioner Senauer suggested, and also the word existing for the resident, height of the existing.
Of the existing residence?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that was the intent of the motion. I mean, it was the intent of the motion since I made it. Thank you.
All right. Well, all's well in Montecito. So I'd like to thank
We still have to have
just
approval of the property. That's just the conditions.
I believe the motion has been made and seconded to approve the project subject to the staff conditions and then the additional 2 conditions as stated.
I had one more condition I'd like to discuss.
Oh, gosh. All right, so we're going to have to move to reconsider
Yes.
the motion that has been passed.
Correct.
Sorry,
Correct. We
Commissioner
don't need
Newman.
a separate motion just for the condition. It
Right.
can be
Yes, that
wrapped
was
into a
just a
single
motion.
motion.
A motion for the conditions, right. So we haven't done the entire approval yet.
Yes.
No, we have done the entire approval, right?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we would suggest one single motion for the entire project, inclusive of any modification to the conditions.
That's exactly my thought, and I thought that's what we had done, but if there's any need for clarity here, we'll take care of it right now. So let's call this a mulligan. I think formally on the record, we do need a motion to reconsider, and then we'll have a motion made should the motion reconsider pass. So the chair will entertain a motion to reconsider.
Also move.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to reconsider the motion that's passed.
May I
All in-
ask a quick discussion?
Yes?
The intent of my motion was just to revise the conditions. I did not make a motion to approve the project, so I don't think we need to reconsider the previous motion that was passed. We just need to make a motion to approve the project.
All right. Motion to reconsider has been moved
So-
and seconded. Any more discussion?
So, yeah, Chair Newman, members of the commission, so my recommendation is when we are, for just future references, when we are making motions on matters, it's recommended that we make the motion on the full project, which will include any conditions, and not make motions on individual conditions, albeit it leads to some confusion. So that's my recommendation. Any future motions today, we'll make it on the full project and add conditions as they're revised or added at that time.
All right, well, while we're having discussion on this, the chair's recollection is that the chair stated the motion that we would adopt the staff recommendation, which includes obviously all the staff conditions. In addition, that condition 2 would be added as stated, and that the first condition would be as restated on the record. But let's just go ahead with the motion to reconsider, and we'll clarify all of this in one single motion. So all in favor of moving to reconsider, please indicate aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Now, the chair will entertain a motion as follows. The motion would be to approve the staff recommendations, including all of the conditions stated. Additional conditions for the project approval would be item 2 as stated in the compromise condition language, and item 1 as staff will read it to us from the compromise conditions as well.
See if I can get it right. Any tree or other vegetation planted, placed, or maintained on the project site as part of the subject project shall be maintained in a manner that it will not exceed the ridgeline of the first story of the existing residence, period. Vegetation in the east and west side yards shall not exceed a height of 8 feet, period.
Okay. All right. Is there a maker of the motion?
I will remake the motion to include the approval of the entire project, along with these conditions, condition 2 as stated and condition 1 as modified.
And the staff conditions as stated.
And the staff conditions as stated, yes.
All right. Is there a
Although Commissioner Senauer was eager to include another condition.
Is there a second to the motion?
I will second that motion again.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Discussion. Commissioner Senauer.
Thank you. I'd just like to hear about including a relatively pro forma condition that is on most projects of dust mitigation and watering. I understand this project is not comparatively a large project, and it has been pointed out that the APCD does have a letter regarding diesel particulate and emission reduction measures, but there is going to be some grading. It's going to be minimal, but if there is dust, I would like it to be mitigated in the pro forma condition that usually accompanies a project, with recycled water only being used. Thank you.
Staff.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I believe Commissioner Senauer is referring to, if you recall back to the Grossman-Goodstein project that you approved the minutes on earlier this morning. It had that dust control condition, which was modified for that project to include the use of reclaimed water for watering purposes. A similar language or scope is provided as an attachment to the condition letter from APCD and would therefore carry the same weight in that, and its attachment, it's attachment A to the APCD letter dated October 15, 2018, and that's their standard fugitive dust control measures. In the first bullet, it does indicate that reclaimed water should be used whenever possible. It's up to your commission's discretion whether you're satisfied with that existing condition language from APCD, or if you wanted to add to it the standard dust condition that is applied in other projects.
Commissioner Kupiak? Your light's on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Further discussion? Commissioner Senauer?
Just to clarify, then why is the dust mitigation condition, the pro forma one, ever, if the, usually an APCD accompanies any project, correct? So wouldn't the APCD basically be the reference for dust mitigation vis-a-vis having a standard pro forma condition that the county usually has on a project?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, it's mostly a belt and suspenders approach. Projects that involve more significant grading would typically have both, just so it's very clear and apparent as far as what the requirements are, given the limited scope of ground disturbance or grading associated with the project, which is essentially limited to pool excavation. It was determined not to be necessary, but it's up to your commission's discretion.
Thank you.
Commissioner Keller?
As the maker of the motion, I consider the APCD letter and the conditions of the dust, regarding the dust on the water, to be sufficient, so I would like the motion to stay as it's proposed.
Okay, seeing no more comments from the commission, I await council's review of something.
Chair Newman and Commissioners, I'd just like to point out that the standard conditions do require compliance with the APCD's letter. However, the APCD's letter states that the dust mitigation measures are recommended per attachment A. So if you wanted to make those mandatory, I would recommend that the motion include mandatory compliance, specifically with attachment A to the APCD's letter, if you want that to be a mandatory condition.
All right. Commissioner Senauer?
I would like to include it as mandatory. Thank you.
All right. Hopefully we can accept that as a friendly amendment. Will the maker of the motion and the second to the motion accept that as a friendly amendment?
I accept that.
I accept it as well.
All right. Now, I sense we're ready to proceed to vote. So all in favor of the motion to approve the project on the terms and conditions stated in the record, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. All right. All opposed? Abstain? None. 5-0. It passes. I'd like to thank everybody for their cooperation in resolving the issues before us today. Thank you. All right. Continuing on with the standard agenda.
While everyone's getting set up, why don't I just read it into the record?
We'll take a moment to set up.
The following is a hearing to appoint MPC members to a joint subcommittee for the Olive Mill and San Ysidro Road roundabouts.
Welcome.
Good morning, Chair Newman, members of the Commission. Just as a brief update to the memo that was provided dated February 20th, the subcommittee request is for the Olive Mill Road and San Ysidro Road roundabout project. That project hasn't come in, which you heard earlier, as an application yet, but in anticipation of it coming in the next couple months, the Public Works Department, in conjunction with planning as well as the City of Santa Barbara staff, are looking at forming a subcommittee with the Montecito Board of Architectural Review members, a member or two members of the Montecito Planning Commission, and then members from the city. There's one city planning commissioner, one historic landmarks commissioner, and then one architectural review board member as well that would be on the subcommittee. So 6 to 7 members, 3 from the city and 3 to 4 from the county, depending on how your commission would like to approach the subcommittee. And then other than that, the Montecito Board of Architectural Review made their selections on January 31st. So there are 2 members from that group that are planning to be on the subcommittee. And we're anticipating that the subcommittee will consist of probably 1 to 3 meetings for a couple hours at a time. It's really to get a background of the project and then to assist in some of the landscaping elements for design. And then we have Matt Daubertine here, as well as Walter from Public Works. And so they can provide more information on design and the general project if you have questions as well.
All right, thank you. Please, Mr. Daubertine.
Members of the Commission, good morning. Thank you for your time on this issue. I just wanted to provide a little bit of background on the jurisdiction of these 2 roundabouts because it's kind of unique. So there's 2 roundabouts that are being constructed on North Jameson. One of them is at San Ysidro. That is entirely within the county's jurisdiction. Then you get to Olive Mill at the intersection with North Jameson and Coast Village Road. That's a trickier beast. That has split jurisdiction between the County of Santa Barbara and the City of Santa Barbara. And then, of course, because the both roundabouts are touched by entrance and exit ramps associated with Highway 101, that then involves Caltrans. And so those are the three entities collaborating on the design of these facilities. But from a standpoint of an issuance of a coastal development permit and the authority in terms of which planning commissions would be acting on these, your commission would be acting solely on San Ysidro, North Jameson, and then you would be jointly acting with the city of Santa Barbara on Olive Mill, North Jameson. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Anything else to add from Public Works? All right.
Mr. Chairman, quick question.
Please.
So when I was on the commission, we had all 12 of us, you might remember, at the City Hall once. So didn't SBCAG also have jurisdiction?
Commissioner Cole, specifically related to the issuance of a permit for development, SBCAG would not have any authority.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Keller?
I would like to ask a question about process, because when this was presented to us, it was as a $800,000 study for the feasibility of both of these roundabouts. There were some community meetings held, at which point there was unanimous opposition to the San Ysidro roundabout. There was, as far as I'm aware, no further input and no further decision making, and now you're talking about both roundabouts going forward without exploring the opposition to the San Ysidro or the alternatives for the San Ysidro. So please fill me in on what happened between this being a study and now seems to be a fait accompli, because we were not made aware of those steps.
Chairman Newman, Commissioner Keller, you're citing events that happened a long time ago in terms of meetings that were in front of your commission. Since that time, the exact date is slipping my mind, but this past summer we had a community meeting. It was an information meeting. It was a community workshop. It was attended by probably about 100 people, and there were split opinions. I'll be honest with you. There were people who completely understood the traffic and circulation challenges at both intersections. They have seen the backups occurring on exit and entrance ramps at 101 San Ysidro. There were other people who were, as you indicated, completely opposed to the project. What we did have, though, was, I think, a very open and honest dialogue and a good exchange of information about the purpose and need of the projects. The Board of Supervisors has not issued a contract for construction, so no final decisions have been made as to whether the project will be built. We are in design right now. We're nearing 30%. We're going to have an environmental document that's going to be produced that'll give us a lot of information about the design, the impacts, the benefits associated with the project, and from there we'll move forward. But we want to have your commission involved. As you know, I think it was back in December, Diane Black informed you that your commission is going to have jurisdiction and acting on both of these roundabouts. So we look forward to working with you. And if there's questions that you have, and if we need to sit down with you and look at some plans and kind of help you get familiar with what's going on, we'd be happy to do that. But if you missed that public workshop, it was, I think, again, a very healthy exchange of information for all the participants.
May I continue to speak?
Yes.
I was present at the meeting that Commissioner Cole referenced. I've been involved. I think I'm the longest term member of the Planning Commission. So I'm aware of the process, and I was at that public meeting. There is no opposition, as far as I could determine, to the Olive Mill roundabout. And in the opinion of people in San Ysidro, there was unanimous opinion that something needed to be done, but a lot of disagreement on what. And some of the other options that included signaling, et cetera, and I'm wondering if this new, the vehicle miles traveled metric rather than the level of service metric will have any impact on that intersection that needs to be considered before the move to a choice of a roundabout.
Chair Newman, members of the commission, If I may intervene for a second. I appreciate Commissioner Keller's questions. However, I just caution the commission that we are straying a little bit from what is agendized. If the commission would like to have this particular matter agendized at a subsequent meeting where we could ask specific questions on processing or a status update on what the next steps are, I think we can do that. Maybe we'll have to coordinate with Matt and his team as far as what date they're available. The action before you, the item before you that's been agendized is really a selection of subcommittee members to look at the designs for both of these roundabouts. So anything outside of that is straying a little bit from what's agendized. So I just caution the commission to be aware of that.
All right, Commissioner Senar.
I have a question about the subcommittee membership. It is a subcommittee of what committee?
Commissioner Senhauer through the chair. So the subcommittee member selection, my understanding is just that it's aimed to be, could be, I suppose, called a committee and not a subcommittee, but it's aimed to just include members of bodies that would hear the project otherwise, to get more more information and background on the project before it comes to your commission, as well as to provide landscaping and other input for design for the roundabouts.
So to continue, personally, I think the designation of a committee versus a subcommittee offers more clarity. Mm-hmm. I think subcommittee people are asking, well, it's a subcommittee of what? And so it's just, it's just linguistics or a descriptive that I think is simplified.
Or maybe, if I may, the question to be answered, nomenclature aside, is when this group of people meet and confer and reach a conclusion, who will they report those conclusions, recommendations, or whatever to? Where will they go?
Members of the commission, a little bit of background on where this came from. This was borrowed from a City of Santa Barbara process that was used on the replacement of the railroad bridge at Cabrillo Hot Springs. There's going to be a roundabout at Cabrillo and Los Patos, and they felt that just to kind of give some designated members of their committees sort of an early look at the project, just to be able to see if there's anything that popped for them that staff needed to know about in advance of the hearings, so that way they'd come in better prepared. We can call this anything. Staff has actually been referring to it as an ad hoc committee, and the idea was, again, just to get a couple of you more familiar with the project in advance so that we could, again, see if there's anything that we needed to be prepared for.
And if you could perhaps answer the question, when this group meets,
yes.
And after its meetings are completed, it will, I presume, prepare some type of written report, and where will that report go next?
Chairman Newman, we haven't really envisioned such a formal process. I think it was mainly to meet with members of the various committees, hear your feedback, and then have that be able to inform subsequent staff reports and presentations as we go back. We're not going to ask this group to make any decisions. We're not going to ask you to take votes. We're going to ask for your opinions to see what it is that you're thinking about as you look at the projects.
Chair Newman, just to provide a little bit more background on that as well. So the committee would meet, and then the design team or the engineering team, it would be present at those meetings as well to get input received. We've done this with a couple other projects in a similar way, so that public works staff and then their engineers would kind of understand better how to move forward in terms of landscaping and overall design. So it's not really a formal, it's not so much a formal process where a written report would be, provided or discussed at your commission's hearing prior to a permit application coming in.
All right. Commissioner Cole.
Well, just to move forward, I think it's a great idea on a number of the projects that we've talked about, the Miramar and others, both roundabouts or intersections have been a problem. So I think it's a great idea by Public Works. Whatever it's called, however the information seems like it's going to go to Public Works, we get two from this commission. Is that correct? So I'd like to go ahead and nominate someone, if that's all right.
Let's just have closed discussion first, if I may. Commissioner Keller.
I just So you have clarified that this committee will have no decision-making ability. We will be able to give you opinions regarding landscape and design. Who is the decision maker? Who will be deciding whether or not these projects go forward?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair. So the project would go through the Montecito Board of Architectural Review and then would come to your commission as a project once the application's been submitted. So your commission would have jurisdiction over the project.
So we would be deciding.
And then,
ma'am, just to be clear, so it's already a project. There will be funds put into the design of the project. So it is moving forward, but for subsequently architectural adjustments made by the Board of Architectural Review and possibly some conditions attached by the Montecito Planning Commission, but essentially it's a fait accompli. That's all I wanted to clarify.
Commissioner Keller, through the chair. So it's just like any other project. The applicant in this case would be County Public Works. We haven't received an application from them yet, but we are anticipating an application would be submitted. So when if we do see a project at that point, the jurisdiction for the project for San Ysidro would be your commission, and then Olive Mill would be joint commission. And at those hearings, you can make. It's your discretion to make a decision however you choose.
Thank you.
All right. Commissioner Seno.
A question about the ad hoc committee. Is the community informed at all after these 2 or 3 meetings that this committee, ad hoc committee, is going to be in discussion with? There's no note taking, no minutes, that sort of thing. Is that correct? So the community isn't on the same page. Like they met the week of, and this was sort of the discussion. It's not going to be videoed, it's not going to be archived, it's not public record. Thank you.
Members of the commission, we would of course summarize the issues discussed and the information that we received in a subsequent staff report that would go to MBAR and then ultimately to your commission.
All right, so if I may hazardly, at my own risk, try to summarize. We are being asked to appoint 1 or 2. We are being asked to appoint up to 2 members of the Montecito Planning Commission to serve on the advisory group to Public Works on an interjurisdictional basis, to give input to what is anticipated will be a future project that will come before us and be treated in the ordinary course of business as we would review it after MBAR review and the like, and then it would come before the entirety of the commission. So, and I believe I've stated the intent correctly. Is there anything anybody would care to add before we move then to nominate people?
Chairman Newman, I think that was perfectly summarized.
All right, thank you. Did something right today. So, with that said, are there any public comments with respect to this agenda item?
Nothing in them.
All right. Nothing has been submitted in writing. There's nobody indicating they care to speak. We'll now proceed then to appoint 2 members of the MPC to serve on the advisory group, as I'll refer to it. So let me open the nominations and suggest we perhaps nominate 1 person at a time. And I'll ask if nominations are now open.
Okay,
Commissioner Cole.
Thank you, Chairman. I will nominate Commissioner Keller. I won't give a campaign speech on her behalf. However, because of the length of service, both she and I have been through these issues before on various projects. But also, I think the thing that I like the most is that she was elected as a director of the Montecito Fire Protection District. I think public safety and fire issues are big. So if she would, if she wants to accept, I would nominate her.
All right. Is there a second to the nominations of Commissioner Keller to serve?
I second.
All right. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All right. All in favor of Commissioner Keller serving, please indicate by saying aye.
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 All right. Nominations are open for a second position on the advisory committee. Commissioner Keller.
I would like to nominate Commissioner Senauer, who has indicated an interest in serving.
Second.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All right. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Congratulations. So our advisory committee representatives have been designated. We thank you for initiating this process, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future. I would like to say, we'll discuss it later in our meeting, I think there's keen community interest in these projects. And I am going to request, if my colleagues agree with me, that you come back before us with an update on the real status of this, so that any perhaps misperceptions in the community can be clarified, so there'll be an opportunity for public comment and education, and that if our agenda time allows it, maybe even at our March, I think it's the 20th meeting if possible. Okay. So I hope you'll be receptive to that and be willing to come back to give us and the community an update on this very important project of great impact and significance to Montecito.
Chairman Newman, members of the Commission, we've made a lot of progress on the design of these projects. We can share with you that information. More information is always a good thing. And yes, we look forward to helping to educate you and members of the public about where we are right now. I think a status report would be an excellent idea.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that, and hopefully your calendars will permit. Commissioner Keller?
I just wanted to second that. Thank you for bringing that up. The reason I asked about progress and process is because a number of people who were at that summer meeting with me came to me as a planning commissioner wanting to know what the process was, how things had been progressing. And since this is a televised public forum, it's always good to have this as an opportunity to bring issues of public interest before us. So I hope, thank you for following up on Commissioner Newman's suggestion.
Commissioner Seno.
Yes, I'd like to concur. I think as a matter of public record, it's of import that this be in this room, videotaped, archived for the community to review and participate in it at any level. It's really critical as a matter of public record, so the community all has one source to view and to be informed. Thank you.
Members of the Commission, if I could, I just want to assure you the design team that's working on this project is going into this with their eyes wide open. We get it, that these are major gateways to the community of Montecito. There are intense aesthetic issues that we have to pay attention to. We have to get it right. And that's why we're excited to go into this part of the process where we start to get feedback from the community about, do we got it right? Do we have a design that's starting to shape up that reflects community values? Or at a time when the design can still be modified, when we can still make some aesthetic choices that better reflect your values, let's do that now.
Well, thank you for that. And that said, I think you sense the sense of the Commission that this is important to the commissioners, to our community. And if you would, perhaps check your calendars for March 20th and advise the Secretary of your availability. Maybe we can agendize this for that meeting. So thank you very much. And unless there's anything else, we'll conclude with this agenda item. Thank you very much. All right. Continuing on, we'll move on to standard agenda. Item 3, Thomas Fire and January debris flow rebuilding report.
Okay. Montecito Planning Commission will receive a report from Planning and Development Department on rebuilding after the Thomas Fire and January debris flow.
Chair Newman, members of the Commission, we just have a brief status update in regards to the Thomas Fireman Montecito debris flow, status of the planning department's recovery and rebuilding efforts. As I reported earlier, I guess last year. I guess this is our first meeting of the year. As I reported last year at some point, we had 323 those disaster cases open, and just for your recollection, those cases were one per parcel. And so there was 323 records open to help track the number of properties that were impacted. We're staying steady at about 70% of those properties of being contacted or affirmative contact with the case managers. And then we've had about 68 of those records closed, as in no further actions being done on the properties as far as recovery. Either it was completely demolished and the people are waiting for further action, or all the repairs have been done. There are a number of properties that have been demolished, and the property owners are actively working with our department to rebuild. So that's the status of those, and those cases remain open in those circumstances. We are continuing to try to collect and consolidate our data. So I did hand out the report that you're familiar with, which is the green, yellow, and red safety assessment, and as far as the updates as far as those safety assessments goes. And again, as a reminder, that report is really just on the statuses of those safety assessments that were done. And and I know there's continuing questions as far as there are properties that were, red tagged as being unsafe and restricted that have either been demolished or the structure been removed, and that the properties are now posted with a green tag, which is a safety assessment. So to complement that information, there's another report that we're currently working on that I've presented to you today, which is a summary report of the number of permits that have been reviewed by our department in regards to the rebuilding recovery in Montecito. And so there's two columns, one that summarizes the planning permit side, and the other that summarizes the building permit side. And the supervising planner, Petra Leva, which is the lead as far as the rebuilding recovery goes, can answer any questions in regard to that. But as you go through that report, it talks about the number of exemptions that have been submitted for formal review with our department, and then it breaks those down into different categories. And then as you move down that column, it lists the number of land use permits that were submitted and the types of structures that were submitted for, as well as coastal development permits or coastal development permits with hearings. So the intent of this report is just to provide a very, very broad and brief summary to the members of the commission to review and evaluate. And then on the other column under building permit summary, we're working internally to consolidate these numbers, and Supervising Planner Petra Leva can talk a little bit more about this. But on the building permit summary counts, one of the things that we've learned through this process is how we're collecting data, and not that we want to do this ever again, but one of the things that we've learned is the collection of data needs to start at the very beginning, and there's processes due to the emergency nature. We just started tracking permits in different type of permit tracking numbers, and so that adds a little confusion when we're trying to consolidate that data, because they're getting grouped under different record numbers. I don't know if that provides further confusion to the commission, but that's just an example of why under building permits there's building permits, and then you see a counter permit numbers. And the reason why I go down that path with you is that initially there were demolition permits that were issued over the counter, and they were captured with the C&P number. And then as we progress through our recovery building efforts, we transition to issuing building permit numbers, which are BDPs. And so there's a little bit of a mathematical formula you have to do to get those numbers, and I'll let Petra talk about that. But anyway, we just wanted to provide a brief summary to the commission as far as the activity that's going on within our department, to give you a little bit better understanding of the number of permits or activity that's occurring within our department, in addition to that safety assessment.
Okay, thank you. For myself, a question, if I may. I see on the permit schedule there's an asterisk after the phrase residential new. What does the asterisk refer to?
Chair Newman, members of the commission, that asterisk is referring to that's the total number of residential new structures that are being submitted for permits.
Okay, but the asterisk itself, is that
so the
have some
asterisk,
meaning?
when you look at the blue wording in the bottom, the report looks at all planning and building cases linked to mudslide disaster recovery. So it's just a clarification that there are people that are submitting for new homes in Montecito all over the county, and what this report's trying to capture are those permits that are linked to a disaster case. And so if you property wasn't impacted, you're applying for a new house, it's not capturing those. So we wanted to make sure that that point was clarified, that this is capturing all those properties that are linked to a disaster case.
So the column then that says residential new means a new home is being constructed on the property, but that construction is totally unrelated to the Thomas debris flow?
Chair Newman, members of the commission, it's the other way around.
Thank you.
I think
Commissioner Senauer.
for clarity, I think, and that's what I was looking for, the asterisk should be carried down to the blue. And that's the reference of the asterisk. It's
Asterisk.
asterisk. Thank you.
Commissioner Keller.
And my question was, because I'm always having trouble with the red, yellow, and green designations. So I see that the totals in both categories are 635. So there were 635 structures that were impacted by the debris flow. And initially they were green, yellow, red. So the migration into the other category, the current category, is because the reds that were demolished are currently in green. Is that correct? And the yellows that are repaired are currently in green? Just would you make sure I'm understanding that correctly again?
Yeah, Commissioner Keller, through the chair, I think you said that correctly. When you look at the original inspection, that's just a tally of all the original inspections that went through. And so the process is we went back and did re-inspections. Properties were recategorized as either being yellow or green. And then as people came in and did repairs, it transitioned from repairs were done as completed and now it got green tagged. Or there's properties that were red tagged as being severely impacted or are restricted, and the property owners opted to either repair those and then they could transition to a yellow tag as far as being restricted, or they were completely demolished and the house is gone and there's nothing left on the property, and that would be a green tag as well. So Commissioner Keller, you adequately summarized that transition through the postings of those tags.
And may I just ask, just as a follow-up, please, the 58 that are listed, still red placards, so those are ones that are awaiting demolition, most of them, or awaiting rebuild?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, that is correct. It's saying that there's 58 other residential type structures that are currently have a red placard posted on the property, and they're pending some action by the property owner, and that could be a variety of different things, either demolish them or submit for permits to repair them or other activities on that level. So that is correct.
Commissioner Cole.
Thank you, Chair. You may have said it, or it may be on these pages and it's just not jumping out at me, but last year everybody, including the commission, but particularly the staff, worked very hard on the like-for-like, particularly the enhanced like-for-like that has to do with the debris flow. So how many permit applications have you had under the like-for-like? And I'm sure you've had some, and how many have been granted?
Commissioner Cole, didn't know if my mic was live. Commissioner Cole, through the chair. When you're looking at that summary report, when it says total number of exemptions, exemption would be something that would be considered under that like-for-like ordinance. And so there's been a total number of 50 applications that have been submitted for a review for standards to be exempt from a permit. Okay. And then you can see the breakdown of the types of structures or permits that were submitted to be reviewed.
Do you have any information on, so, you know, the traditional like-for-like, just rebuilds, but here we had where you could move up vertically and you could move horizontally, you know, away from a, so how many did you have where you actually moved the building?
So Commissioner Cole, through the chair, that's an excellent question. we are not tracking the data at that level, at that detail, to know which ones are applying for that type of exemption.
And for myself, if I may, if somebody is obtained a permit and is constructing an ADU, where would that follow in this data report?
So, Chair Newman, members of the commission, I need a little bit more clarification on that question. So what this report is capturing, before you restate that question, is this capturing all the properties or all the structures that were impacted by a debris flow? And so where that potentially could follow in at would be a residential structure. And so we're not categorizing them as far as it's a residential second unit or an ADU. There's the primary house, and then there could be an ADU or other property. And so what we're trying to capture on this one, and I'll let Petra Leva jump in on that, is that it would either be under the a residential new structure potentially, or a residential repair, because that's how we're classifying them, is to be a residential type structure.
I'm sorry, my phone was ringing. Excuse me. I'm sorry, my phone was ringing. Petra, did you want to add to that?
Chair Newman, the only thing that I wanted to add is ADUs may or may not be counted in this. It depends. If the ADU, if they had an ADU on site and it was damaged, then it is captured in this. If they did not have an ADU and now they're coming in to change, maybe they had a guest house that was damaged and they want to rebuild it as an ADU, that would be under an exemption.
Okay. I don't think anybody would have built an ADU pre-Thomas. So since the ordinance went into effect after Thomas. So what I'm understanding then is if somebody has applied for and received a permit for an ADU, it's not captured in this data at all.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Keller, your light's still on.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering, shouldn't, Mr. Wilson, shouldn't the total number of exemptions be reflected in the underneath? So you say there's 50 exemptions, but the numbers below that add up to 48. And then you say down below where you said total number of CDPs and CDHs, you say 3, and the number below that adds up to 2. Is there something missing there?
Commissioner Keller, to the chair. We'll explore that and come back at our next meeting with how the formula behind the scenes is counting those.
Because there may be a category that isn't reflected in that total. So,
please. Did you want to add something?
The only thing, Chair Newman, members of the commission, the only thing that I wanted to add is just to give you a little bit more of an explanation on building permits. And so currently we have 51 issued permits for full demolition, and 87 permits were issued for partial demolition. Of those, we have completely signed off 34 of those total 51 permits for demolition, whether partial or full. There have been 17 building permits submitted for commercial properties, and 10 have been issued of those 17, and primarily those are for San Isidro Ranch and Casa de Maria.
Okay.
And then the statistics also shows that there are 37 building permits submitted for repair, and also 30 have been issued. In addition to that, it shows under counter permits, 37 permits submitted and 37 issued. And I wanted to give you a little bit more explanation of that, and that depends on the extent of the repair. So a counter permit is something that when the architect comes in with their plans, if the review can be done there at the counter, the permit will be issued at the counter, so they get what is called a CNP. If it is more of an extensive repair, then the application will be taken in and it gets a building permit and reviewed a little bit more extensively, and it could take about 10 days to issue that permit. So that is the difference between those two.
Okay, thank you. All right, and just one more question, if I may. In the safety inspection report where it says current posted with whatever color it may be, what is the current date limit that we're talking about? In other words, what period is encompassed? Is it through February, what, or January, or?
Yeah, Chair Newman, members of the commission, the report reflects dates current posting as of today. And so that's the date range at the top of the page is the date range that we're capturing the records that were issued or generated during that date range. But when the reports run, it's looking at whatever is currently posted as the date the reports run. And the report was ran today.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Sandauer?
Yes. What are you finding the wait time is? If someone, the wait time, say, for an inspection to get things, you know, if they've done a bit, they need more. Is a backlog? Is staff keeping up with it? Are you finding there's a 2-week delay before an inspector can get out? Are things pretty timely?
Commissioner Seenauer, through the chair, in regards to the response to the Montecito debris flow and recovery efforts, we still have supervising building inspector Brad Candle that's pretty present in the field, and what we're finding is that through his efforts and the other building inspectors that our response to the requests for building inspections are timely.
All right, well, thank you for that report. If there's nothing else, we'll receive the report. And thank you. We'll continue the reporting on this at future meetings. All right, continuing on with our standard agenda. Why don't we take a few moments both to set up for the next standard agenda item and also for a bio break. So we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. My hope is we'll be done by noon. Thank you. All right. Call to order, reconvene the Montecito Planning Commission meeting of February 20th, 2019. We'll proceed now to standard agenda item 3, I believe it is. 4, excuse me.
All right, thank you. The following is a hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department that the Montecito Planning Commission receive and refile the 2018 Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report, determine that the Planning Commission's actions are not subject to the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to CEQA guidelines sections 15060C3 and 15378B5, and recommend that the County Planning Commission authorize staff to provide the 2008 Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report to the Board of Supervisors, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and the California Department of Housing and Community Development.
All right, thank you. Ms. Steele?
Good morning, Chair Newman and Commissioners. My name is Jessie Steele, and today I'm going to be presenting the 2018 Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report. The Annual Progress Report, or the APR, is a state-mandated report that provides information regarding the status of the county's comprehensive plan and progress in its implementation, as well as the county's progress in meeting its Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA, in calendar year 2018. Government Code Section 65400 requires the county to submit the APR to the board, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and State HCD by April 1st of each year. The county also submits the report to the City of Santa Barbara in accordance with policies in the Mission Canyon Community Plan. SB 35 and AB 879 went into effect in 2018, which added new reporting requirements for the APR. In part, these bills require additional planning and building permit information to be included in APRs, starting with this year's report. And HCD adopted new forms and data tables to reflect these changes, which are included in Attachment 1 to the APR. So they'll look a little bit different than last year's tables. And one of the bills, SB 35, also established a streamlined mandatory permit process for qualifying projects, which we'll talk about in a couple slides. The 2018 APR shows that the county continues to make progress in maintaining and implementing the comprehensive plan, especially the 2015-2023 Housing Element Update. The Housing Element contains 37 programs to help meet the housing goals and needs of the unincorporated county. The county made progress toward implementing 3 of these programs in 2018, which are listed on the slide. And Table D of Attachment 1 to the APR contains more information on the status of these projects and other active programs. The county also initiated updates to the circulation element and safety element in 2018. This slide simply provides a list of the projects that the county worked on in 2018, which affect portions of Montecito. And as you'll see, some projects are noted with CZO in parentheses to indicate that those only affect the coastal zone portions of Montecito. Do we have any questions on this slide?
There's one item I don't see listed, which is the Santa Barbara County ADU ordinance for the coastal zone of Montecito.
Chair Newman, that'll be the first one on this list on the left-hand column. The APR also summarizes the county's progress in meeting its RHNA for the 2015-2023 housing element cycle. RHNA progress is determined by the number of building permits that the county issued for net new housing units during the previous calendar year. So this would include permits issued for housing units such as ADUs and ag employee dwellings, but it does not include replacement units such as disaster rebuilds or group quarters such as dorms. The APR also reports the estimated affordability level of each unit based on the 2018 state income limits, which are adjusted for household size, and available local housing data. Local housing costs are researched and estimated by zip code, and therefore the affordability level of most units depends on their location. In some areas of the county, even small units are not affordable to lower income households, and therefore the county cannot automatically assume that all small units, such as ADUs and AEDs, are automatically affordable by design. This table here shows the number of building permits that the county issued for new housing units, organized by income category within the unincorporated county from calendar years 2015 to 2018, which is the first half of the county's 8-year planning period. And the last row of the table there shows the county's RENA for each income category. In 2018, the county issued building permits for a total of 328 new housing units, which is a substantial increase over the 208 units permitted in 2017. As you can see, the county has exceeded its RENA for the moderate and above moderate income categories within the first half of the planning period. But in that same time, the county has met only 59% of its low income RENA and 36% of its very low income RENA. As noted in the second to last row, the county has issued a total of 58 very low and 63 low income permitted units in total, but most of these units come from larger housing projects that were permitted in 2015. So if the county continues this trend of permitting only a few lower income units every year, it will quickly fall further behind on meeting its RENA and will remain subject to SB 35. For purposes of SB 35, the state tracks the county's progress towards its lower income RENA, which is the combined very low and low income categories. So this means that the county must meet its RENA for both income categories, and falling behind in one or both will result in the county remaining subject to SB 35. Therefore, the county should actively take measures to encourage and approve larger affordable housing projects, particularly very low income housing. This chart here shows the same information as the previous slide. So it has the number of building permits that the county issued for new housing units from 2015 to 2018. And the last set of columns on the right shows the county's total RENA for the planning period, which is 661 units. So you can see the county's exceeded its above moderate RENA. We only had a goal of 284 units, and we far exceeded it with 501 units permitted. And we also exceeded our moderate income RENA of 112 units by permitting 193. However, the county has only issued 121 permits for lower income units, and the county is supposed to be at the 50% mark, with at least 80 very low and 53 low income units. So next year, the county needs to meet 5/8 or 63% of its RENA for all income categories. And in order to get back on track to meet these targets, the county must issue building permits for at least 100 new very low and 4 low income units by the end of 2019. Of the 328 units permitted in 2018, 37 were located within the Montecito Community Plan area, and they included 25 ADUs, 10 single-family dwellings, and 1 duplex, which counted as 2 units. And all of the units were affordable to above moderate income households. This slide here just shows the general location of the new housing units, with the red parcels indicating those lots with a new housing unit. And as you can see, they're just scattered throughout the plan area. There's not a particular pattern. Yes?
Commissioner Sandow?
Just for clarification, new housing unit is not a demo and a rebuild, correct?
Commissioner Senauer, through the chair, for purposes of the APR, we do not count disaster rebuilds or any other type of demo and rebuild. Right. So these are just net new housing units that are shown on the slide and that are talked about in the APR.
Commissioner Keller.
Excuse me. So the large new housing units in 2018, that looks to me to be Casa Dorinda. Is that correct?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, when you say large unit, you
Well,
mean
there's one large red on the map here.
Oh, that would just be one large parcel, but there may only be one unit developed on it. A couple of them do have a single-family dwelling and an ADU. I think that's the case for just a handful of them.
But just in terms of interpretation and practical purposes, that is Casa de Renta, correct?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Yes, I think those of us who
There
are
was
familiar
one
with
duplex.
Montecito.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
There's
you.
one duplex, I think, done for Casa de Renta, and it could be on that parcel, but I'd have to check my data to know for certain.
Okay, thank you.
SB 35 establishes a mandatory streamlined ministerial approval process for qualifying housing developments in jurisdictions that have not met their pro rata share of RENA or have not submitted APRs. In June 2018, HCD determined that the county was subject to SB 35 streamlining because it had not made sufficient progress towards its lower income RENA. HCD will release SB 35 determinations annually in June, which will take into account permit data from the previous year's APR. SB 35 streamlining applies to qualifying housing developments that have at least 50% affordable units and are located on urban infill sites. And these projects are subject only to ministerial objective planning standards. And to plan for potential SB 35 development, long-range planning staff will begin processing objective design standards for SB 35 projects in 2019 and 2020. CEQA guidelines. Oh, yes.
Mr. Keller.
I apologize, but could you define urban infill?
For purposes of SB 35, they're defining urban infill as a site that is surrounded by at least 75% developed urban uses within a census-designated urban area.
And what is an urban use?
Does
that just mean a house, or does it need to be commercial, or does it need to be multi-residential? Is there any clarification on that?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair. For SB 35, they're specifically looking for parcels that are zoned to allow residential or mixed uses. And this is also only within the inland area, part of the SB 35 streamlining. There's a long list of areas where this does not apply, and one of the first ones they list is that it does not affect the coastal zone. It has to be urban infill, has to be zoned for residential or mixed use, and there's a exhaustive list of other criteria that these types of projects would have to meet. But there are a number of parcels in the county that are potentially eligible for SB 35 streamlining.
Thank you.
So let's see. CEQA guidelines, section 15060, states that an activity is not subject to CEQA if the activity is not a project. And CEQA guidelines, section 15378, specifies that projects do not include administrative activities of governments that will not result in direct or indirect physical changes to the environment. The preparation and submittal of the APR is an administrative activity that does not authorize new development or otherwise result in physical changes to the environment. Therefore, the preparation and submittal of the report is not a project and is not subject to CEQA. Lastly, staff recommends that your commission take the following actions. First, receive and file the 2018 Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report. Second, determine that the preparation and submittal of this report is an activity that is not subject to CEQA. And lastly, recommend that the County Planning Commission authorize staff to provide the annual progress report to the board, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and State HCD, and the City of Santa Barbara. And that completes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have.
All right. Thank you very much. Commissioner, questions? Commissioner Keller.
Thank you. Just to understand the relevancy of this to Montecito, are there any qualifying projects in Montecito or that are lands that would be subject to this that would be a qualifying project? Are there any locations that have been identified as such?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, we've only done preliminary research so far, but we do have an estimate of potential parcels that would be eligible. Let me see. Within the Montecito plan area, there's approximately 372 parcels that could be eligible.
And would these be empty parcels currently, or parcels that might be interested in redevelopment or have applied for any kind of a permit?
These would all be, they're already developed. And part of SB 35 also specifies that if there's housing existing on any of these parcels, that there are restrictions with what can be built on it. So that also presents a challenge. So even though there are 372, there's a chance that depending on what is on that parcel, they may not all be eligible.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions from the commission? All right. Thank you, staff. If I may, exercising a little prerogative, I asked, and staff happily prepared the schedule that is on slide 5, and I'd like to direct everybody's attention to that. Personally, I thought that our views are relevant to receiving the report on these items, to acting upon these items, but only these items. So as an example, the airport land use plan consistency amendments, which are part of the report before us, really are not within our scope of our review and purview, are not matters in which we are schooled or our views are particularly relevant. So if my colleagues agree, I would propose that whatever action we might take today be limited to those projects listed on slide 5, which are within the purview of the Montecito Planning Commission. Commissioner Seno?
Just for clarification, we are to receive, correct, this report. We don't, or can we offer recommendations? I thought this was just a receive the report. Thank you. On this, on the comprehensive. Thank you.
Commissioner Senauer, through the chair. In this case, since the project isn't solely located within Montecito and it's really a comprehensive countywide report that's required, your body makes a recommendation to the County Planning Commission. We'll make a very similar presentation to the County Planning Commission next week, and then as the essentially the planning agency for the county, they'll make a take final action, and then we'll distribute it to the state and to the city and the board after they take action.
To be as precise as I possibly can, we're asked to receive the report submitted and to authorize the County Planning Commission to receive our action, and also for the Board of Supervisors to receive that as well.
Chairman Newman, that is correct. Thank you.
And that is why I suggested that the items on page 5 be the ones to which we would confine our receipt of the report and any actions that we might take if that's acceptable to the commissioners. So with that said, the chair will entertain a motion to receive the report from staff with respect to items 1 through 11 listed on slide 5, and to then also authorize the passing of our receipt of the report onto the Santa Barbara County Planning Commission and to the Board of Supervisors.
I so move.
All right, it's been moved by Commissioner Cole. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Senauer. Any discussion on the motion?
Yes.
Commissioner.
I thought you nodded to me. Has this been done in the past, that we only approved those things that specifically affected Montecito, or have we received the entire report and only potentially suggested changes to those items that affected Montecito?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, this report comes before the Montecito and County Planning Commissions every year. It's a state mandated report. However, it's Because it's a state mandated report discussing our work from the previous calendar year, the Montecito and County Planning Commissions both receive and file the report, and then the County Planning Commission is the one that authorizes staff to submit it to the board and state agencies.
Thank you. I know you did explain that before. I'm just asking if in the past we have ever limited our receipt to only those items that affect Montecito. I don't recall in the past that we've ever done that, and I'm wondering if that might create any kind of issues.
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, you've not limited your actions in the past to just projects within Montecito. And the truth be told, I mean, it is provided as information. What we're really doing is supposed to really inform the state that we are actively implementing our comprehensive plan and taking steps to keep it up to date. Where the state really focuses, however, is on the housing data and what's happening there. And as Ms. Steele explained, there are now consequences to not meeting your pro rata RENA, which is what the state in part is focusing on through new legislation that's been going into effect over the last 2 years.
Commissioner Senor?
No, may I finish, Mike? Because I see no harm and, in fact, potential red flag if we don't receive the entire report. So that was my concern.
Commissioner Senor?
Yes, I'd like to revisit my concurrence with the carve-out of these projects. I would like to receive the entire report and file without the carve-out.
All right, well, we have a motion on the floor. Just to explain the chair's sense, it was my view that, for instance, the airport land use consistency amendments are absolutely well beyond anything we ever touch upon, have any knowledge about, and could possibly approve as having been stated correctly or appropriately. I did not personally want to lend the imprimatur of the Montecito Planning Commission to something which we have absolutely nothing to do with. So that was the idea behind the dividing of the question, to limit the projects to 2018 projects stated on item 5. We're acting purely in an advisory role, and I want to advise personally only as to those items within our purview. So that was the reason I entertained the motion, which has been made and seconded. Commissioner Cole.
So Chair Newman, members of the commission, just a matter of procedure, we do need to open up for public comment at some point.
Commissioner Cole.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with my motion because I think Mr. Bell said that the state would like to know that we're focusing on these at the local level, and when we actually carve out the things that we have jurisdiction over and other things that we don't, I don't think it really makes any difference, but I think the record shows that we're focusing on it, on what matters to us.
Chair Newman, members of the commission, just to help move this along, another way of looking at it for Chair Newman's point is that the commission could receive and file the whole report. Actually, you've already received the report. And then you could provide recommendations that are specific to the areas under the Montecito Planning Commission's purview. That way it kind of balances both of the issues that are brought up. Is that we'll receive and file the full report and provide recommendations as it concerns items of interest that it pertains to the Montecito Planning Commission.
Okay, perhaps the maker of the motion and seconder will accept that as a friendly amendment.
I will accept that as a friendly amendment.
Okay.
I believe that she seconded it.
All right, and you'll accept that as a...
Absolutely, and that's what I intended that we should do, but I think Commissioner Senera has to accept the second.
Yes, I so accept the second.
All right, so the motion that's before us now is that the Montecito Planning Commission is receiving the entirety of the report, but passing on for further review, action, and so on, only those items enumerated on slide 5 that touch upon and affect Montecito. All right, before we proceed to a vote, is there any slip for public comment? Or? All right, anybody who'd like to be heard? No.
Yeah, I would just...
All right, Commissioner Kupiak.
Just as, you know...
Please turn on your microphone. Your microphone, please.
For my own knowledge, you know, if we don't meet our RENA requirements in the county, and I think the county-wide conformance does affect Montecito, particularly because we're all interrelated. But what happens when we don't meet our housing requirement? What penalties are imposed under SB 35? And B, what does the county actually do to incentivize some of the development of this housing that might help us to meet these requirements? Are there incentives provided to developers?
Commissioner Kubiak, through the chair, as a consequence of not meeting our pro rata share of RENA throughout the planning period, a jurisdiction becomes subject to SB 35 streamlining, which the county is currently subject to. And what that part of the bill does, it essentially takes away part of our local control over, it takes away our discretionary review over larger multifamily housing projects. And it's a way of encouraging that sort of development on qualifying lots. And the county will remain subject to SB 35 streamlining until it starts to meet its RENA targets. So, for example, next year, by the end of this year, 2019, if we're not at 63% to our RENA for all income levels, then we remain subject to SB 35 streamlining throughout 2020. And the county does have several programs in place to help incentivize affordable housing development, but there's always more that can be done. But for example, we do have our inclusionary housing ordinance. So for sale units, a certain percentage of them do have to either pay, the developer either has to pay a fee or include affordable units as part of the project. There's also provisions in our ordinance that deal with density bonuses for qualifying projects, which goes along with the state's density bonus program, where developers can ask for waivers or concessions if they agree to provide affordable housing as part of their project. But as part of our efforts for 2019 and 2020, our LRP staff is planning on working on SB 35 specific objective design standards. So that will also help further streamline the process for those qualifying projects.
Thank you. All right.
Chair Newman, just real quick, if I could just add one thing in addition to what Ms. Steele provided. Also, just very recently, Assistant CEO Terry Moss-Anisich just convened a working group of county employees that work on housing-related issues to not only track legislation, but also to lobby Sacramento and Washington, D.C. on housing-related matters, and to coordinate all of our efforts with regard to the provision of affordable housing. And the types of groups who are involved with that are obviously planning and development, Sheriff's Department, the Community Services Department, which provides a number of housing assistance programs and things of that nature. So there's going to be more activity for that group. They just inaugurated the group just the other week, and we'll be now meeting once a month and working on those issues. So.
All right. No further comments. I sense we're ready to move forward on the motion before us, which is to, 1, receive and file the 2018 Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report. 2, determine that our actions are exempt from CEQA. And 3, recommend that the County Planning Commission authorize staff to provide this plan to the Board of Supervisors, etc., with respect to our views and expressed in the report on items on slide 5. All right. All right. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, staff. All right, proceeding on.
The following is a hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department Long Range Planning Division, staff for the Montecito Planning Commission to receive a report on the Long Range Planning Division's fiscal year 2019-2020 work program and direct staff to forward any comments to the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you. Staff?
Good
Morning, Chair Newman and members of the Commission. So for the record, my name is Dan Clement. I'm the Deputy Director of Long Range Planning, and I will be presenting to you the fiscal year 2019-2020 work program. So very briefly, the presentation is going to consist of a brief recap of some of our accomplishments and challenges with the existing work program. Then we're going to go over some considerations that go into the development of the work program for the next year. And then finally, our recommendations for what should be included in the work program. So first off, taking accomplishments. Ms. Steele just did a really good job summarizing some of our major accomplishments, and then also in your written staff report, there was a description of 5 projects that we completed in its entirety. Once again, I'm not focusing solely on Montecito projects, but if you have any questions about the applicability of any of these to Montecito, just let me know. But those are listed here. I've be more than happy to answer any questions you might have about them. But in general, we had some important projects. For example, we finished the cannabis land use ordinance and licensing program. We also adopted some important maps for the Eastern Galita Valley Community Plan that pertain to the environmentally sensitive habitat and riparian corridors and vegetation alliance maps. That was a very neat project where we partnered with, for example, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and others to prepare those maps. We also completed a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, which was required pursuant to the existing Energy and Climate Action Plan, and that emissions inventory served as the basis upon which the Community Services Department developed their report to the Board of Supervisors last December with regard to our progress with regard to the ECAP goals. We also completed the Gaviota Coast Plan, although it took a little bit more work in order to do so, which I'll get to later on in this presentation. And then finally, we completed the Montecito Design Guidelines Phase 2 project. So although this was not included in your written staff report, we did make substantial progress, although have not entirely completed the projects that are shown here on the screen. The short-term rentals ordinance amendments, those were adopted by the Board of Supervisors. The coastal zoning ordinance amendments were presented to the Coastal Commission. However, the Coastal Commission rejected those. So there's still some work to be done. More on that later in the presentation. The next 3 items shown here, that is the ADU or Accessory Dwelling Unit Ordinance Amendments, Coastal Resiliency Project, and Agricultural Employee Dwelling or AED Ordinance Amendments. Those are all before the Coastal Commission and are pending Coastal Commission certification. We learned just last week that the ADU ordinance amendments will be going to the Coastal Commission next month for certification, and Coastal Commission staff plan of attack, so to speak, at this point is then next to take on the AED ordinance amendments and then finally the Coastal Resiliency Project amendments. We've also completed quite a bit of work on the Hoop Structures Ordinance Amendments project. However, as I'll explain later, that involved additional work, and we will be presenting those amendments to the board next month. And then finally, we are going to complete within this fiscal year the Hollister Avenue State Streetscapes project, which is a project that came out of the Eastern Galita Valley Community Plan, which involves creating a multimodal plan and landscape plan for the corridor, which will complement a public works street widening project that is going on along that corridor. So, with accomplishments come challenges, and although we accomplished quite a bit, there were some impediments that resulted in us not getting as far as we wanted to within the work program. For example, we had additional projects added to the work program and not a corresponding FTE allocation. So we could only do much with what we have, and what happens in that situation is if we get assigned too much work, we have to push something aside while we work on the new assignment, and the board establishes our priorities. So we will work on whatever they say we are supposed to work on. So last year, as part of the adoption of the final P&D budget, there were 2 projects added to our work program. That is the Rodeo or Union Valley Parkway roadway extension that affects the Orcutt Santa Maria area, and that involves amending the Orcutt community plan and circulation element to provide for a roadway that connects the Elks Lodge to the Union Valley Parkway interchange at 101. And then we were also assigned to develop a utility grade solar ordinance amendments, and that also involves the development of a feasibility study that the Community Services Department is currently working on. And once the Community Services Department completes that feasibility study, which is estimated to be completed this spring, we will then work on the corresponding ordinance amendments, and that will also involve the CEQA analysis for the entirety of the project. As I mentioned earlier, we got a new assignment when the Coastal Commission rejected the board-adopted coastal zoning ordinance amendments for short-term rentals. And the board directed us to go back and prepare ordinance amendments that are more in line with what we believe the Coastal Commission would like to see and is willing to accept for certification. And then finally, just at the end of last month, there was an additional cannabis ordinance assignment that came out of a board hearing, which involved an update on the cannabis ordinance and licensing program. And in general, what it involves, two components. One, looking at a prohibition on cultivation within the Ag 1 zones, and then also increasing notification requirements for cannabis projects that are located either adjacent to, require a roadway through, or are within an existing developed rural neighborhood. Also, a number of the projects that were already included in our work program involved unanticipated work. So, for example, with the Gaviota Coast Plan, when we received the very extensive list of modifications from the Coastal Commission staff, we were directed by the board to go back, suspend the processing of the certification of those amendments, and work with the Coastal Commission staff to resolve the policy disagreements. And there were additional hearings, extensive meetings with Coastal Commission staff in order to make that happen. I am happy to report, though, that we were successful, and we came up with a compromise that did meet both the Coastal Commission and the board's desires. The Hoop Structures Ordinance Amendments project that's going through it just completed the Planning Commission hearing process, and we will be presenting that to the board next month, and that got hung up due to additional Planning Commission hearings that were unanticipated for that project. And then the third item listed here, that is the Agricultural Employee Dwellings, or AEDs, ordinance amendments. This was an interesting one because this was actually a subcomponent of a larger ordinance amendment project that we've had in our work program for a number of years but have not been able to get to, and that is the Agricultural Tiered Permitting Project. And we pulled this element out of that larger project in an attempt to try to process that through, because we thought it was going to be a very streamlined, straightforward project. However, what we discovered was that there were some interesting policy ideas that came about from that, and it actually took longer, particularly to get through the Planning Commission hearing process before we got those to the board, so it involved additional work. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, in December, the Community Services Department provided a report on our progress with regard to the Energy and Climate Action Plan. And whereas we were supposed to be seeing a 15% reduction below GHG emission levels as of 2007, we've actually seen close to a 15% increase in GHG emission levels. So we've got more work to do on this. And as a part of the board's direction back to us, they actually increased the targets such that now they would like us to work on a 50% reduction below 1990 levels by 2030. That's going to be challenging, and we're now working on how we're going to make that happen. And once again, we're going to be working with the Community Services Department on that. And one last item with regard to that was the board wanted to take a regional approach to dealing with climate change and reducing our GHG emissions, and they directed us, and more specifically the Community Services Department, to start coordinating with the cities to see what we can do collaboratively to address climate change. Okay, so we started out this year with 4 vacancies. I'm happy to say that by October, we have filled all those vacancies. We got great staff, and we're now firing on all cylinders. But there was a gap during that time, couldn't get much done. Some things had to be delayed, but we are now working in earnest to get to make up for the loss of time. Also, long-range planning staff assisted with the Montecito debris flow recovery efforts, which took us away a little bit from some of our work. And then finally, the Office of Planning and Research just published amendments, updates to the state CEQA guidelines. Those are not currently reflected in our environmental thresholds or our administrative procedures for CEQA. So we are going to be working on amendments to reflect those changes. And also, as an interim measure, just so everybody's aware of these new requirements, we also give out a lot of information to the other planners, publish to the public, there are new requirements, so be aware of these, even though they're not currently codified or shown in our regulations. So, with that said, move along. What goes into the development of the work program? Well, as stated in past years when making this presentation, the purposes of the Long Range Planning Division work program presenting it to you today is to receive public and other stakeholder input, review the ongoing projects that are within our existing work program, which will have continuing work for the next fiscal year, select the projects that warrant the funding and staff allocation to be completed, and then if you have capacity, identify potential projects for future work programs, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Throughout the year, I receive a number of calls, suggestions, ideas about things we should do. We do our best to keep track of all those and include those to the degree possible, given fiscal and labor constraints. But we also, I didn't receive any specific requests as a part of the preparation for this hearing today. I did receive one phone call from Laura Bridley where we generally discussed the work program, but once again, I haven't received any specific requests from any of your constituents or anyone else for that matter. We also want to make sure that our multi-year projects get the continued support so that we can complete them. And then another assumption that goes into the development of the work program is that we do not anticipate that there's going to be an increase in staffing. So there's 11 of us on the Long Range Planning Division work team. So I have 10 employees below me, so that's what I get to work with. Also, we look at state mandated projects, what we have to do, what we need to change in order to reflect current state law. And then also, as we stated in the past work program, what we are now trying to do is move away from the projects, that is complete the projects that have narrow interests. They either benefit just a specific community or certain interest groups, and we really want to try focusing on the county-wide programs and projects, and specifically our general plan elements are pretty out of date, and they could use some updating with regard to current standards that have come out of the state. So more about that in just a minute. So the work program consists of 3 components: our required services and operations, our ongoing projects from the current fiscal year, which will have remaining work for the next fiscal year, and then once again, if we have capacity, any new projects that we should take on. So just very briefly to get through those. This table is the same table that was provided in your staff report. It lists the required services, that is the major required services that we conduct, and you can see it consists of everything from seeking grants. We also serve as support staff to a number of committees. We also advise other county agencies with regard to projects that require, for example, an evaluation of whether or not they're consistent with the general plan. We also spend quite a bit of time reviewing environmental documents and other publications from other jurisdictions regarding projects that have an effect on county resources, and we serve as kind of the coordinator or clearinghouse on behalf of the county executive office when commenting on those projects. And then we also, everything from the report that you just received from Ms. Steele to we monitor LAFCO and SB-CAG activities. So when you add it all up, it comes out to roughly 1.5 FTEs. That's what we found over the last 10 years. And also we conduct operations. This is kind of your standard administrivia, as I like to call it. Every business seems to go through this. It has to do these things. Consists of everything from what I'm doing here today with this report and managing our budget. We are also, as part of the P&D update to its overall website, we are also working on the Long Range Planning Division web pages, and that's taken up quite a bit of time. I'm happy to say that we are ahead of the game, and we should have that completed, at least our portion, next month. And then we also conduct the standard business practices of things like staff meetings and trainings, employee performance reviews, and other administrative activities. And this roughly adds up to about 3 FTEs total per year. Okay, so this table lists the ongoing projects from the current fiscal year that will have remaining work for the next fiscal year, and in some cases following the next fiscal year. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these. There was a summary of them in the staff report. If you have any questions about them, I'd be more happy to go through them. But as you can see, just some general comments. the projects that I'd say are kind of the biggies that are going to take, they're going to require multi-year efforts and a significant staff effort, work effort, and we've already started working on those, are the circulation element update. Once again, the energy and climate action plan amendments to reach the new target that the board has established for us, and then also the safety element update. Those are going to be big ones that are going to take us literally years to complete. And when you add it all up, it's about 3.8 FTEs. We're also working on a number of ordinance amendments, and those consist of everything from amendments for specific projects to bundling minor amendments to be processed as a package. Mr. Noel Langle, before he retired, would process those. We are now having to take on that work within the department elsewhere, and I would say probably the take home on this is that, once again, state housing and density bonus law amendments, those are going to be a significant work effort, as you just heard from Ms. Steele. We are behind on meeting our RENA numbers for our low and very low income categories, and SB 35 has taken effect. So we're going to be working on amendments to reflect those new requirements. And that's all I want to say about this, unless anybody has any specific questions about any one of these projects. It adds up to about 2.7 FTEs. So I hate to say it, but when you add up all of the existing work, we have no capacity to take on any new work. So if you would like us to take on additional work, keep everything in the work program, please make a recommendation to the board that they allocate the resources such that we can take on that additional work. Because what we don't want to be in is the situation like we ended up this year, where we get more work assigned to us than we have warm bodies to process. Sometimes it's suggested that we consider contracting out the work. I can tell you that that doesn't really help us a whole lot, because even in that situation, it still requires a certain amount of staff activity just to manage the contract and work with whoever is the adjunct staff who's working on behalf of the county. In fact, we're going through that right now with our Southern California gas ordinance amendments, and we have adjunct staff that we just brought on to take on that project, and it's taken us time because we have to now manage those who are processing these. It doesn't really help us. So if you would like us, once again, take on additional work, you can either request or recommend that the board provides the resources to do so, or identify the projects you believe should be suspended until we process whatever you believe it should be a priority. And then once again, I just want to state that for future work programs, we are trying to focus once again on county-wide projects. And we want to prioritize the completion of those existing projects that have a more narrow focus that are currently in our work program. And I've listed just some of the general plan elements here on the screen. You can see the dates that they were last amended. Some of them are coming up on 30 years old. I am very happy to state, though, that at least we're taking on the circulation element, which is 18 pages long and was originally adopted in 1983. So we've at least started.
Sorry. No, just you say you're taking it on. Where is it listed?
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, Chair Newman, Commissioner Keller. It's actually listed on this slide on our ongoing projects. The second row indicates the circulation element update. The second to the bottom is the safety element update. So for the next steps, I will be making a very similar presentation to this one to the County Planning Commission next Wednesday. On March 7th, the planning director will be presenting the work program to the Agricultural Advisory Committee to solicit their comments. And then finally, I'll be presenting the work program to the Board of Supervisors on April 2nd. And then following that presentation, the board will have the opportunity to further consider the work program during its budget workshops the week of April 15th, and then finally during their budget adoption proceedings in June of this year. So a recommendation to you, I'm going to summarize these. The actual recommended actions are set forth in your written staff report, but basically that you find that this is not a project that is subject to CEQA pursuant to state CEQA guidelines section 15378B5, and that you recommend to the board that the board allocate the funding and staff resources so that we can continue to provide the services, operations, and work on the projects with remaining work for the next fiscal year. And that concludes my presentation. I'll be more than happy to answer any additional questions you may have.
All right, thank you. Questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Kupiak?
Do you feel like you have enough resources in your FTEs to actually attack the issue of a 2030 climate change monitoring and change to our ordinances?
Chair Newman, Commissioner Kupiak, it's an ambitious goal.
Well, I was just looking. I was just looking through the amount of, in terms of specific types of allocations that you've made. It's like 1 FTE, maybe 1.1 FTE to devote to anything that really has to affect, radical climate change. And I kind of am critically aware of what 2030 looks like.
Yes. Once again, I believe it's an ambitious goal. I don't want to say that we can't pull it off. I think our work is cut out for us, though. I think, and I should also clarify, when I'm indicating the FTE allocation, that's just for the next fiscal year. I anticipate this is going to be a multi-year project, so we're going to be requesting more in future, for future fiscal year work programs. We're still in the preliminary stage of how we're approaching this task, and we've been working closely with the Community Services Department, and I think realistically, if that's going to happen, that is, we're going to adopt that goal and we're going to have real measures that will make that goal happen by 2030, there will have to be additional resources provided to us and the Community Services Department in order to do so.
All right.
Subject near
Commissioner,
and dear to all of our hearts.
Commissioner Keller?
You said you have 10 in your department under you, or 10 including you?
10 below me. So there's 11 including me.
Okay, so that could, because the FTEs add up to 11, so I was wondering. But you were down staff by almost 40% last year. Is that the reason that some of these, it looks as though, however, that most of these ongoing projects, a number of them are because of Coastal Commission requirements or resistance. It seemed like you were pretty efficient with what you had available to you last year.
Chair Newman, Commissioner Keller,
That's
I believe so.
Okay.
No, not to be flippant, but my staff worked very hard. I'm very proud of what they completed, despite the fact that we were down close to 40% to start off the first quarter. We did accomplish quite a bit, despite the fact that we were given additional assignments above and beyond what we could feasibly do. So I'd say yes. So I feel like it was a success. Others will disagree, depending on which priority they place on the various projects.
So my question is, then now that you're at full staff, why are you resisting having any new projects added to your plate?
Good question. So once again, whatever we don't do right now or within this fiscal year just gets delayed if we're going to continue working on it in future work programs. So if you think about it, there were a number of projects that didn't even start within this fiscal year, which were supposed to have been started. We're just starting those now. So they're going to have work for the next fiscal year, whereas when we developed the current fiscal year work program, we were anticipating those would be completed before we even get to the next fiscal year, or we anticipate that they'd be completed within the next fiscal year and we could take on more work at that point in time. However, now when you shift out all of the timelines and schedules and remaining work on the existing items, you just don't have the capacity to take on additional work. Once again, the board could always delay or say, stop work on this project, take on something else. I don't advise doing that, because that overall, over the long run, is going to produce even greater inefficiencies for us to complete those projects. So, but
Commissioner Sano.
This is still part of this, if you don't mind. You have these listed as ongoing projects, and you've just now referenced some that you didn't even begin. Could you designate which those are?
Excuse me. We didn't begin those at the time at which we anticipated beginning those. I'd say at this point, with the exception, there's certain projects we can't begin. So for example, the work on the solar ordinance amendments, we cannot work on that until the Community Services Department completes their feasibility study, which will be the basis upon which the ordinance will be written. So I don't even know which sites to evaluate until they complete that study. Another example would be the airport land use compatibility amendments. SB CAG is responsible for actually adopting the plans for the airports. Whenever SB CAG completes those plans, then we are obligated pursuant to the state government code to process corresponding amendments within 6 months of their completion of those airport master plan. So I can't begin those until we get that information. So we're waiting on information from others in order to begin the work. But the majority of the projects, we have at least started a preliminary amount of research, or we're pretty far along into them. So
thank you.
Commissioner Seno.
Thank you very much for your report. Very detailed and appreciated. I have a question regarding budget. And for FTEs, can you kind of give a range what one FTE is? I mean, budget-wise, I mean, it's 10, 11, it's 0.8. But when it translates into metrics and numbers, what are you looking at?
Sure. So Chair Newman, Commissioner Senauer. So it changes from year to year, obviously, because changes which occur with that. But it's roughly about $155,000 for one FTE, and that's an average that's done.
All right. For myself, if I may, I appreciate this report and the difficulties under which you labor. I'm wondering and would like to suggest that it might be worthy to actually put on our agenda for November or December an opportunity for us to give you input as to what we might want to see in the work program for 2020 it would be, so that we're sure to have that opportunity and actually give it some thought by putting it on the agenda, and also letting the community perhaps have input as well in that process, if that would be acceptable.
I'm sorry, Chairman Newman, I didn't hear what time of year would you like to do so?
November, for instance, or toward the end of the year, before you issue the proposed work program, to give us some opportunity to comment on any new projects or suggest them, and also to have an opportunity for community input for the work plan before you actually get into the draft. I understand that we're very much in a triage situation with resources, but nonetheless, giving both the commissioners and the public the opportunity for input by putting it on our agenda, I think would benefit your department as well as benefit the process and be of use to the public. Concerned as we all are, I think that your department, within the department, be it full staff, I want to make sure, one, that all vacancies are now currently filled, and two, should somehow or other the county treasury win the governmental lottery or whatever, would it be difficult to add additional FTEs? Are there talent and willing people of ability to come on board? Because frankly, it's my ongoing concern that this function, critical as it is to the foresight and future of our community, not just Montecito, but the entire county, ends up kind of being the bastard child of the budgetary process, that we're funding ongoing operational issues and so on, but that this critical aspect of our planning and development of long-range planning is not as fully funded as we might all like to see.
Chair Newman, so your first question, yes, we are fully staffed at this point. Second, I do want to take the opportunity of some efforts that the department, not just my division, but the department has really prioritized recently, employee retention, and we've been working on a number of programs with the existing staff to work on those sorts of intangible items to attract employees here, because it is a pain in the neck to attract good planners here because of the cost of housing. Similar to other affluent coastal jurisdictions, the cost of living here it's not helping us when it comes to recruitments, because there are other jurisdictions which have much lower costs of living, where planners making equivalent pay can own their homes. They just can't do that here, and that's not unique to our department. That's countywide. So that's a formidable impediment to retention and attracting employees here. What I'll say with regard to the allocation of FTEs, as you're probably well aware, we have the renewed 2022 efforts. One component of that is fiscal responsibility, trying to see what we can do with leaner budgets. I don't know how much leaner my division can be and still get a reasonable amount of work completed. The allocation of additional FTEs, that would have to be something evaluated by the county executive office, who would then advise the board as to whether or not they can find, for example, the general funds to support additional FTEs. And I also want to make it clear that if the board does decide to add FTEs to my division, I want those to be permanent FTEs. I don't want to be, I'm going to have a difficult time attracting somebody here for temporary employment for a year. It's going to be difficult. So I'd much prefer to have, if they're going to go there, give me an FTE that's going to stay on board with us for the long haul. So it's possible, but it's a budgetary consideration that is above my pay grade and requires input from the county executive office in order to make happen.
Okay. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Senauer.
In your ongoing projects, I just want to reference the safety element update on page A3. And of course it has flooding, wildlife, debris flows, etc., which are very reference our area particularly. The last sentence is public outreach, consultant procurement, and development will occur in 2019. Public outreach, what sort of public outreach are you thinking about? Thank you.
Chair Newman, Commissioner Senauer, it will be a combination of items. It will be not only utilizing the planning commissions to hold hearings to get guidance, policy direction on items. We'll also be conducting workshops throughout the county, and depending on the specific issue that's going to be discussed, we'll try to strategically locate those. So it's going to be a combination of, once again, using the planning commissions and doing workshops. And we're also going to need a technical advisory committee of technicians to advise us on, for example, we have to develop a vulnerability assessment that identifies areas that are subject to the various types of hazards resulting from climate change. And we need support with that. So that would consist of everyone from climatologists possibly working at UCSB to others who have already prepared vulnerability assessments for other jurisdictions, just to hear tips and tricks, best practices, things like that.
And one last follow-up to that regarding best practices and long-range planning. For debris disposal, basically what we're getting now is emergency permitting on our beaches for beach nourishment. Is there active discussion regarding a long-range plan for debris disposal, rather than, of course you never know when the event will occur, but that happens in a lot of areas. So is there thinking of a long-range plan and best management rather than just emergency permits all the time? Thank you.
Chair Newman, Commissioner Senauer, there hasn't been anything specifically discussed on that, but just kind of thinking out loud, that very well could be a component of our safety element update, or could be, for example, a program set forth in the safety element which says, okay, county, we want you to work on just such a program. So,
Commissioner Keller.
I will ask the question that I started to ask about the change over from the metric of level of service to vehicle miles traveled in regards to the circulation element. Do you have any opinion or preliminary thought as to how that might impact or change intersections, roads, etc.?
Yeah, Chair Newman, Commissioner Keller, yeah, very good question. I would say that the changes that have come about via state law with regard to transportation, climate change, housing, have turned planning on its head. And what I mean by that is there's this really interesting interconnection of all of those now, where, for example, we have a severe jobs housing imbalance. Well, that affects climate change in the sense that it increases GHG emissions because we have more people commuting into the community now. It also has an impact on the social fabric of our community because there are certain components of our society who, although offer up their labor in our community, don't have the privilege of living here. It also has to do with housing. It also has to do with economics. And with circulation, what's very interesting now is the state really does not care about congestion. And I was just reading the changes to the state CEQA guidelines before I came into this hearing, and there's a specific statement that says that is not a CEQA issue anymore. We can still address it through our general plan policies, but at least for the purposes of CEQA, all we are evaluating now are vehicle miles traveled, and that is for the express purposes of reducing our GHG emissions to address climate change, and then also all of those other indirect impacts by, once again, having more compact communities where you locate housing in proximity to multimodal forms of transportation and everything that comes along with it. So it has revolutionized planning. Indeed, the planners who are working on the circulation element update, it's been interesting. They're very enthusiastic about the project, but they also very quickly realized how challenging of a project it is, because now we have to, for example, come up with models that show what is the typical distance a person travels if they live in this specific portion of the county. Now, if a new project comes into that area, we need to see a reduction in those vehicle miles traveled over what has historically occurred within that community. As an unincorporated county, we don't have the urban areas with the facilities such that we can identify, we can, for example, utilize some of the incentives that the state has written into state law for locating development within those areas where it will reduce VMTs and GHG emissions. So once again, we have our work cut out for us, and it also has demonstrated that we need the cooperation of the cities, because that's where the development needs to occur at the densities needed in order to put a real effect, make a real dent in our jobs housing imbalance.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. Let's go now to public comment. Laura Broadway, thank you for your patience, and please come and
Really. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This morning has been very interesting for me, I have to say. I started working as a planner about 32 years ago. So my second job was as a transportation planner for the city of Ventura, the very first time they created that position. And then the jobs housing balance was reversed. My commute down to Ventura was difficult going southbound in the morning and a breeze coming back northbound. So it's interesting how it's actually shifted. But anyway, with my Montecito Association hat on, I just wanted to thank staff for such a great report, and also to Dan personally for giving me some time last week to kind of bring me up to speed on all of the priorities that are facing the county. The Montecito Association is also going through a little bit of a redefinition of its goals. They did a community survey this year, and things that came up high in the respondents' answers were community rebuild, let's get our town back together, not so much the cabana next door. So these kinds of things are important for everybody to understand, but what I'm trying to say as a professional planner at the association is also we are one town in the county, as you well heard this morning from two presentations. And as much as Montecito has been given exceptional service by the county this last year during the debris flow, and it still has a lot more work to do, it's going to be a constant, echo that there are these community plan policies and these community plan elements that have to be attended to. The reason I wanted to stay all the way through to the end of your meeting and have this comment was that in several board meetings in the last 5 or 6 months, we've had members of the public come and say, not surprisingly, our town has changed. We have new geography. We've had a disaster. We need to update the community plan. And then when I talk to them in the parking lot, I say, and what's wrong with it? What's wrong with it, really? Because I was there when the General Plan Advisory Committee was drafting those policies and doing it with June Peugeot, an old colleague. So it's just that, Randall Road's gone and all of this stuff has happened. I said, yeah. Okay, so we're going to go through trying to stabilize that with the debris basin and, public works effort and flood control. But the policies are still pretty solid. But the reason I'm here today is to say that there is some interest in the Montecito area to look at the Montecito Community Plan. Dan explained that this is so far down on the list, it's not even on the list. And I completely understand that. So now I'm going to translate that back to the folks that think that Montecito should get its community plan updated. And, you know, my first explanation is, well, you know, it's a couple $1 million and it's a huge effort and it's frankly a very low priority. And I think that is entirely defensible considering all of the other stuff that has been driven into the county's workload by external forces, you know, mostly the state and this greenhouse gas driving the picture of planning now. So anyway, thank you for the prioritization. Remember that Montecito is out there. And the one thing that the association was willing to do is actually take a look, do some sort of a subcommittee work, take a look at the community plan and outline what policies might need some attention. It's just going to be in our file, and at the point where the Montecito Community Plan rises up to the top of, you know, the pile, then maybe we have something to start a discussion with. So we'll be doing that quietly, but with no, you know, pressure. So thank you.
Well, thank you for those comments. I think I speak for all of us that we're fully aware of the keen interest in our community and in the community plan and its administration. And might suggest we not only appreciate the Montecito Association's role and the Land Use Committee's role, but to the extent that members of the community come before you with concerns, please invite them to come to our meetings and participate on the public record and share their concerns at the beginning of the meeting. We do truly welcome that. So thank you for that input. All right, so now I sense unless there's any more questions, we're ready to proceed on item 5, and the chair will entertain a motion to receive the report on the fiscal year 2019-2020 work program, to direct staff to forward a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to determine that it's exempt from CEQA, and to allocate the funding and staff resources as recommended, all stated on page 5 of the agenda and under recommendations and procedures. Is there a maker of that motion?
So move.
And I second that motion.
All right, Commissioner Cole, seconded by Commissioner Keller. Any discussion?
I do have one small item of discussion. Thank you, she's left, Ms. Bridley, because I came in here with a copy of the community plan with a whole list of items at the rear about things that need to be followed up on. And I was prepared to advance some of those. And I, realizing your workload and realizing your priorities, have not. But I still think that although we are not on the list now, there are some things that need to be put on the waiting list to get on the list, and hope that that can occur in the future. So thank you very much for your efforts and for your excellent report.
All right, any more discussion? Commissioner Cole.
Yeah, Mr. Clement, I would like to thank you and your staff. You know, we all follow the statewide mandates that you have to put on top of your workload. So I really appreciate the breadth of challenges that you have. I mean, I second Commissioner Keller. I wish we had some room for the Montecito community plan, but thank you for your presentation today.
Okay. Since we're ready for a vote, all in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. All right. That completes the standard agenda. Before we adjourn, though, I'd like to say just a couple things. First, I want to express our appreciation and the community's appreciation to Commissioner Cole, who served as our chair last year and this year, a 2-year tenure almost. You served in a difficult time for our community, a difficult time for you personally, but you always did so with exercising sound judgment, common sense, and a pleasant disposition, for which we thank you, and I will try to emulate that. For myself, I would like to say both to my colleagues and to the community that going forward, I hope to emphasize serving our community efficiently and having focused, shorter meetings and setting the agenda for 2019 collaboratively with the input of you, my colleagues on the commission, the community, and staff. And toward that end, I urge both commissioners and also the public to email both me and our secretary with any suggestions for future agendas. For instance, in March now, we are going to agendize a return to discuss the roundabouts. If there are other items that any of you or members of the community would like to see added to our agenda, please do so. And then lastly, apropos to our discussion about long-range planning, I think we need to think as commissioners, what are the things that we'd like to see and consider going forward in this coming year? What are the things that we've seen and are of concern? As an example, personally, I'd like to see us have all of our utilities in Montecito, both the special districts, Cox, and AT&T and others, come and just make a presentation to us and informationally to indicate what have they done to become more resilient should another disaster occur. I think we're all interested perhaps in focusing on our own procedures and what we can do there to be more efficient as well. But any ideas that any of my colleagues or the public have are welcome, and I solicit your input for future agendas. So with that said, unless somebody has something else they'd like to say, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn for today and reconvene on March 20th.
So moved.
All right. Been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. 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 Thank you. We are adjourned.